The wall had a voice that night. It was the slow crackle of old ice, remembering all the winters that had come and gone. The far-off groan where frozen sheets pressed and sighed against one another. The soft scratching of 100,000 unseen crystals, born in the beard of the wind. Jon Snow stood upon the walkway with his gloved hands on the icy crenelles, and listened as that voice went on speaking, tireless and indifferent, as if words never mattered. Of them the stars were hard and thin as needles. Below, in the courtyards of Castle Black, fires guttered and threw up sparks that died quickly in the cold. Men moved between them like ants, their black cloaks turning them into bits of night that walked. He could see the king's banners from here. The black plain beyond the outer palisade had been turned by men into a rough-hammered camp of trampled snow. Gray horses tied nose to tail, iron kettles swinging over low fires, and ranks of pegs set out atop canvas sheets where mail and plate were unbuckled to cool in the air. Amid it all, long pennons with the stag crowned in gold hung stiff as boards when the wind fell, and snapped like whips when it rose. There were other banners as well, less proud. The gaudy red and orange cloth of the Queen's men sewn with a burning heart whose flames licked the paper-thin stars. That was a sigil he had only learned to stomach by telling himself it was no more and no less than a cloth like any other. Cloth could not burn a man on its own. Ghost moved along the parapet beside him, paws soundless on ice, snow powder dusting the red of his eyes. The dire wolf's breath smoked. When Jon reached down, Ghost pressed his head once into his palm. That heavy living weight, a small proof against all the cold in the world. A horn sounded from the east, a single note, then another, and died. Eastwatch was sending word of the sea wind's turn again, or of a ship hugging the coast. Perhaps neither. Sound traveled strangely along the wall. A raven beat past him in silence, darker even than the night, quick as thought. A door opened with a wooden complaint behind him, and the wind struck at the escaping warmth. "Snow," said Bowen Marsh's voice. "It's time." Jon straightened from the crenelles and left the high night. The warmth inside the tower stair was not much warmth, only the smell of men and old wood, and the memory of fire, but it made his fingers ache as the blood decided to flow again. Bowen Marsh descended one landing ahead of him, his darker shape against the rushlight. Marsh had been crying that day and the day before. It was visible in the swollen corners of his eyes, and the damp rawness there that never dried because there was nothing in this cold that stayed one thing or another. Jon thought of saying something kind, and found that all his kind words had been used up on men who had bled out beneath the ice. They crossed the yard. Men were gathered in knots, faces obscured by scarves and the night, the whites of their eyes showing, the steam of their breath lifting away like souls. The king's men had kept to their quarter, the watch to theirs. Still there was mixing at the long kettles where stew thick as mortar was ladled out into wooden bowls. The Queen's men kept their iron braziers burning under the eyes of their red priestess, and the smell of their smoke was not the wood smoke of home, but something sharper that stung the back of Jon's throat. Melisandre herself stood distant, outlined by a brazier's glow, face turned upward to the wall as if studying an old enemy. Red stones burned at her throat and at her wrists, and when her gaze dropped to Jon, it was like opening a door and finding there a hot room with no air. They met in the armory. The room had grown smaller in the last months, or else the men had grown larger, burdened by their fears and hopes until their bodies took up more space than before. Maester Aemon had been carried there in his chair. The chain about his neck glinted a little even in such poor light, iron and copper, black iron, pale pewter, and links that never knew heat. He listened with his head cocked as the rest assembled, nothing in his old blind look to suggest waiting, but Jon knew him too well to be fooled. Janos Slynt stood near the fire as if it ought to answer to him, nose moist, hand at his sword belt's buckle. Othel Yarwick had sawdust trapped in the fur trim of his cloak, and a look like a man trying to read a knot. Septon Shelador smelled of wine, and had nothing to say until he spoke, and then too much. Marsh took his place with a slow exhalation. From beyond the door, the noise of Stannis Baratheon's camp came thinly. Hammer on rivet, a low voice cursing, the clink-clink of a chain being coiled. "You sent for me," Jon said. "We sent for all sworn brothers, Bowen Marsh corrected, as if the truth might blunt whatever edge he feared. We will decide the matter. We will decide it now. What matter? Janos Slint said, rolling the word like a sweet between cheeks that had known better food than the wall served. Whether we bow our necks to the Red Witch, whether we declare that the watched vows can be set aside at a king's nod, there is no matter to decide. We are the Night's Watch. We do not take part. Then shall, Septon Shelador murmured. We render unto the king what is the king's. And what is that? Othel Yarwick asked. Nothing, said Bowen Marsh. Nothing south of the wall belongs to us anymore. It is the only way our words mean anything. If we barter them, they are as cheap as any market stall bargain. I have said so. I will say it again. Yet we bargain every day, Maester Aemon said from his chair, and his voice was so soft that the words seemed to hover like a moth by the fire before it came to rest in the ear. The wall is not a monastery. We trade venison for winter cabbages. We accept wayfarers and send them on their way with bread. We treat with wildlings. We treated with Mansraider, though some of you cursed that, as I know you did. If we are to endure, we must go on making such bargains, for we are not strong enough to endure alone. Bah! Chelador crossed himself where the seven-pointed star would hang if his hands were not in gloves. The prince that was promised has nothing to do with us, Marsh said very sharply, save as any man might come with steel in his hand and demand our gates be opened, in which case we will treat that man as any other. As any other king, Janos Slint said, seizing the word and wrenching it straight. There are kings, Bowen. Kings. It is a fact, and we can no more pretend them away than we can pretend the snows will not fall. We must choose between them. I would choose the Lannisters by virtue of their strength. Jon held his tongue. The old habit, let them speak, measure them, know where they stand, had been beaten into him by a father who had believed the quiet boy learned more than the mouthy one. He watched them. Marsh's mouth worked. Othel's gaze dropped to his hands. Shelador took another breath of wine. The door opened again to admit Dolorous Ed, who shook himself like a dog, an arch of snow scattering from his hood. Ed tipped a small bow to the maester and took a place along the wall. I have written it, the maester said. You asked me to, and I have done it. I did not set my seal, for that belongs to the Lord Commander. These months we have had none. It is a matter for all the brothers, not a handful. But there is ice thickening in the buckets for want of any decision. The king grows impatient. His men growl. Strange. Then? They were born strange, most of them, Eddie said in his flat way. And the other half grew that direction to keep from being lonely. The Night's Watch will not fight the wars of the South, Aemon continued as if Edith had not spoken. We will not acknowledge any man's claim over us. We will declare neutrality, as we have always held it, clear and firm in the hearing of all. But as to the wall itself and the lands immediately around it, and the conduct of those who come here to treat, to supply, to demand, we must have law. We have little enough as it is. If we do not accept a king's peace here, we shall have many men's peaces, all clashing together, and we will bleed between them. I would recognize Stannis Baratheon as the king at the wall for such matters as require a king's word. Justice for crimes done under his banner, judgments among his men when they turn their daggers on one another, punishment for those who violate guest right. He is here. Others are not. Then, recognize, Janos said, tasting the word. A good word that, better than bow. It is a bad word, Marsh said. We do not recognize kings. Then who sits Stannis' men in judgment if one splits another from throat to navel under our very eyes? Aemon asked. Will we? But we have no authority over them. Will they judge themselves? That is a stew of 1,000 flavors, all of them worse than the last. It will end with someone dragged before the Red Woman to be burned under our wall, and then you may come back to me and make another speech about vows. Jon said, What of Mansraider? Heads turned as if a string had been pulled. The air went still around that name. Even the fire's crackle seemed to drop away. Mance, who had brought half the free folk down upon the wall, as a tide brings wreckwood and carcasses and bright flotsam from far coasts. Mance, whose songs had been better than his plans, or perhaps that was only how John wanted to recall him. His fate is the king's if we recognize such matters, Aemon said at last. Otherwise it is ours. And ours, I think, Bowen Marsh said, is the only one that is clean. He is a king as well, John said. Awfully kind. Shelador made a small sound, as if something had soured in his mouth. A robber king. I remind you, Janos Slynt said. How many brothers died at his command? I do not forget, John said, and felt the old tightness at his ribs where Ygritte's arrow once had lived. Nor will I forget how many died who marched with Stannis at the Blackwater. I have not forgotten the Red Woman's fires either. If we are to live side by side with these men for any length of time, we cannot have their justice done beneath our gates in the Red God's fashion. Nor can we pretend we have strength to forbid it if their king commands it. We need words that bar the worst and allow the rest. Words hard as the wall. Then, we have them, Aemon said. If you will listen. He lifted the sheet. The parchment had buckled a little, as parchment always did here. Ink froze if you lifted your pen too long. The letters themselves had a brittle look like something a careful child might chip with a knife along each stroke. To all who come to the wall, the maester read. And to all who hold lands to the north or south of it, as far as the gift and beyond. To all kings and captains and lords. Know that the Night's Watch declares its ancient neutrality in all quarrels and crowns of the Seven Kingdoms. We take no part. We own no king. Yet for the keeping of peace and order at the wall and the garrisons that support it, and for the governance of such men as come sworn to another prince, we do hereby recognize Stannis of House Baratheon as king for purposes of law and judgment within the precincts of the wall, and in such near places as necessity requires. We accept his courts where his men are concerned. We deny them where our own vows are weight. We recognize guest right above all, and we forbid the burning of any man under our wall or within any castle held by our brothers. We will judge such crimes as concern us and ours. We will obey no summons south and grant none north. The others will return. Winter is upon us. Send what men and aid you will, under what king you will, and we will receive them as guests. If they seek to tarry, they will tarry under our customs and our quiet. Signed by the hand of the Lord Commander. He let the parchment fall. No one spoke for the space of 3 breaths. Those words, Marsh said at last, are a cart trying to be a horse. They are a bridge, Aemon said. We must cross it or drown. Janos Slynt sniffed again. I would sooner put my name to a clear letter to the Lannisters asking for bread and coin. Othel Yarwick, who had built most of the small repairs that kept Castle Black from falling down, scratched the edge of his glove. Kings come and go, he said. The wall stays. We do what keeps it standing. It is not more complicated than that. Septon Shelador put a finger to his lip, then unsteadied himself and leaned upon the table. It forbids burning, he said, with the air of a man who sees at last the shape of the thing that pricks him. It forbids burning under the wall. It forbids burning within our precincts, Aemon corrected. That could be at the Shadow Tower, the Bridge of Skulls, Eastwatch's galleries, the ruins of Queensgate. This is our house. We set our house rules. Men have been burned here before, on this very yard, and I am old enough to remember it. But those men were ours, and we made our own judgment upon them for our own crimes. We will not have another god's justice carried out on our grounds. It will be an offense to the Queen, Shelador murmured. Then, it is a small offense we can afford, John said. Better a small offense now than a large one later. You speak boldly for a boy, Janos Slynt said. John's hand itched where Longclaw rested at his hip. He thought of his father's face, and of how he had learned to shape the words. As you say, my lord, even when his bones disliked them. I speak as a brother, he said. And the brothers cannot afford for the Queen's men to make of our yard a stake yard. There are wildling women down in the ice cells with their babes. There are wounded men who have done nothing worse than fight for their own. Will you have them smell the burning? No. You would keep Mansrader breathing, Bowen Marsh said. For a time, John said. For our time. Stannis may have him when he leaves. Until then, he is ours. The hall breathed again. Men's boots grated on stone. Shoulders shifted. Some looked to the window as if it might offer them a better fate than the one the words promised. Outside, the wind gnawed the eaves and chewed the ropes of the ravens' cages. How many brothers stand for this letter? Aemon asked finally. They counted by hands in the air, then by names spoken aloud when the counting could not be trusted. 16 had the courage. 9 had the habit of it. 3 were drunk enough to manage it. All the same, it was more than John expected. When the names were gathered like stones and laid out along the table for all to see, Bowen Marsh lifted his hands in a small, tired surrender. Do it then, he said. Send your letter. But do not ask me to set my seal on a thing I cannot swallow. I have swallowed too much this winter. You need not, Aemon said gently. You need only not set fire to anything in a fit of pique, as some might be driven to do. Shelador made a small chirrup that might have been laughter and might have been a sob. So we recognize the king, Janos Slynt said, as if announcing a victory. I will carry it to him if you like. Kings and Janos Slynt know one another. Maester, John said, ignoring him. I will take it. The king will want to hear it from someone who can answer questions. And who are you to answer a king's questions? Slynt said. A steward, John said. One who has climbed the wall often enough to know which ice is safe. It may be I can tell the king something he has not heard. Slynt's cheeks reddened. Go to him then. Bow until you are bent. John went. Ghost ghosted behind him, a pale shadow in the corridor. A raven sounded from the rookery. Not the plain caw of hunger, but a harsh little word that sounded like a child trying to say no in the dark. He thought of Ygritte, my girl. No, and forced the thought away as he forced the door. The ground beyond the palisade was a stubble field of old steps and new. The snow churned brown in places where men had pissed into it, streaked with black where the droppings of horses had warmed and melted, and then frozen again. His breath plumed. Men watched him come as men at a gate will watch, ready to be what they must if the one coming does not belong. He belonged to the wall most of all. That was the only thing of which he was entirely sure. Stannis' pavilion was a leanness of dark cloth against the night. No paint, no velveted palms, just what was needed. Davos Seaworth stood outside speaking with one of the northern men in a skin cloak. When he saw John, he lifted a mittened hand, and the gesture had gratitude in it, like a light. Davos' beard held frost like it had been sifted there by a careful woman. Steward, the Onion Knight said. Or is it commander yet? John shook his head. We have no Lord Commander. Sometimes I think the wall likes it that way. The wall has odd tastes, Davos said. The king will see you. He opened the flap. Inside, heat struck John like the hand of a man who had been waiting too long for his debt to come due. A brazier stood in the corner, charcoal winking in it like cat eyes, and another further back did the same, and between them heat was trapped behind thick canvas and too many men. Stannis sat with his hands flat on a plain trestle table, each finger pared and clean. His face was what it was, a bony fortress. Only the eyes showed the wear, and that more like a fog behind a visor than any softness. Melisandre stood behind him, and the red stones at her throat pulsed slow as a sleeping heart. A guard in bright mail with the Queen's badge set in the middle stood just inside the door. The guard's breath showed under his visor. Your Grace, John said. He went to one knee with the letter held in both hands. He did not bow his head. If he had learned nothing else at the wall, he had learned to keep his eyes where they needed to be. Stannis extended a hand. He did not look at the parchment. He looked at John as a man studying a tool he had used once and was not certain he had put away clean. Stand, Stannis said. John rose. Maester Aemon's words, he said. The watch heard them. We have set our minds to them. Will you hear them as well?" Stannis waved. Melisandre came forward like a flame walks. She took the parchment and held it near to the brazier until the ink glistened, and then her eyes moved. Jon felt her glance slide along him the way a blade slides along the flat of mail, seeking a weakness. No one spoke until she had finished. It was not the custom of Stannis' tent to interrupt. "A narrow bridge," Melisandre said, in a voice that was not cold and not warm, but a bridge. "You would deny the Lord of Light's justice within your precincts? We would keep the peace within them," Jon said. "If men must be burned, they can be burned elsewhere." "Men must," she said, and her mouth shaped the words as if they were a fruit. "Else the long night will devour all." "Do you know what the night devours, Jon Snow?" "All things," he said quietly. Stannis held out his hand for the parchment. He read slower than the priestess had. His lips pressed thin. Once his gaze lifted to Jon. Twice it fell again. He set the parchment down and tapped it once with a forefinger. "Recognize me as king at the wall," he said. "Deny my justice where your vows are concerned. Send no men south. Permit none north without your leave. Bar burning under your wall. Sit apart and call this neutrality. Man, it is protection," Jon said. "For us and for you. If you burn a man under our wall, you will make enemies in black when you have few enough friends. If you ask us to ride south with you, you will have fewer still. If your men quarrel, they must have a court that speaks with your voice. Or they will end by making a court for themselves and settling matters with axes. The men of the watch will not kneel and will not bend. These words keep us from bending, and they give you the thing you need most just now." "What do I need most?" Stannis asked, and Jon saw on Melisandre's face the ghost of a smile, as if she would like to hear what answer he would make. Jon said, "A place to be king." Stannis stared. A muscle worked in his cheek, as if his jaw would like very much to grind something into meal. Davos' eyes went to Jon and to Stannis and back again, and Jon thought he saw there a measure and a weighing that meant what it always meant from a man who had been at sea too long. "The tide is going out. Build quickly." "A place to be king," Stannis said finally, and the words came out grudging and real. "There is sense in that." "Your men already look to you for judgments," Jon said. "They come to our yard with complaints. They come to blows. They come with spoils they want weighed and shares argued. If we deny that, they will make their own king's justice. If we accept it, we will have a king's justice we can watch. There is little enough law here. We would have more, not less." "Nah. You would have the king who fights for your wall," Stannis said. "But not the king's call when I ask you to fight for mine." "We swore no such call," Jon said. Melisandre's hand lifted and fell, as if smoothing a wrinkle in the air. "The Lord of Light asks other vows." Jon could taste the iron bitter of old blood when he swallowed. "The wall asks what it has always asked. It asks the rest later, when men go into the haunted forest and do not return. Your God can have that part if he likes." "Bendo." Davos made a small sound that Jon could not read. Half a laugh, half a sigh. Stannis let his palm rest flat again against the parchment. "I do not want your men," he said. "I want the north." "You will not have it from me," Jon said, and felt the slice of it in his voice, because he remembered Benjen, and Robb, and his father, and the look in their eyes at certain words that had been always the wrong ones but spoken anyway. "You will have it from those who matter, and they will choose as they choose. If you burn men here, you will have fewer. If you ask us to ride, you will have fewer again. If you live apart and judge your own and keep your fires small, you will have more." Stannis looked at the flame for a long moment. Then he picked up the parchment and held it toward the brazier, and Jon's heart stopped. Stannis did not feed it to the flame. He heated the wax in a small iron spoon and sealed the bottom with a press that left the crowned stag sunk into red. "Send it," he said. "Send it to your outposts and to the castles that still stand. Send it to the lords who pretend they do not know we are here. Deny me where your vows are concerned, but do not think I will forget. Damn. I do not ask you to forget," John said. Only to remember what the wall is for. Melisandre's eyes, red as coals behind snow, rested on him as if he were a piece of wood that would burn very well once it dried. We remember, she said. More than you know. He left them then. Davos followed him a few paces beyond the tent. The cold bit cleanly after the heat, a white-toothed little animal that had been waiting outside the flap. You did a thing there, Davos said. I did a duty, John said. Sometimes they are the same, Davos said. Sometimes they are enemies and claw each other like cats. When they are enemies, John said, you bleed either way. Davos' breath went up. Up. You spoke to him like a man. He is a man, John said. What else is he? You would be surprised how many forget that, Davos said. We do not breathe to kings like to other men in this world. He smiled then, very small. I am glad some of us still do. The ravens left at dawn. 4 went to the Shadow Tower, 3 to Eastwatch, 2 to a place between that had once been a little holdfast called Queen's Gate, and was now nothing but cracked stone drifted into by snow. The rest took southward routes, where the wind allowed small scribbles in the pale sky. Dolorous Ed sent one with a scrap of bacon grease on its beak. For luck, he said. The old gods liked the taste. Bowen Marsh watched them go, his face the color of the sky. If they do not return, he said to no one, we cannot say we did not try. Maester Aemon had slept badly. He had given no sign of hearing the ravens, but when John entered his chamber, the old man lifted his head at once. We have done the only thing we could, the Maester said, though John had not yet spoken. He has put his seal to it? He has, John said. He called it a place to be king. Aemon breathed out. He has not had many of those. Nor many friends, John said, and thought of the men with the burning hearts sewn to their sleeves. Nor many friends, Aemon agreed. He reached for his cup and sipped something that had a bitterness in it that was not wormwood. Will you visit Mance today? Yes, John said. Speak to him quietly, Aemon said, and made a small motion with his hand that could have been blessing or worry. The king's men have long ears. Mance sat in a room that had never been meant for a man. The ice cell was shallow by necessity and narrow, because the ice itself crowded it, frost horfinging in long white lashes from the stone. The door thick and bristling with iron rivets, like the face of a man made of nails. Torches did not last long in there, and he was allowed 2. They burned low and made a small, anxious light of their own that did not reach the corners. Mance sat with his back to the wall, his hands across his middle. He looked no more a king than he had looked when John had first seen him in his antlered helm and weather-stained furs. That had been the point, John supposed. Some men built their thrones out of the armor they wore. Some carried theirs in the angle of their shoulder. You've a wolf, Mance said, when Ghost slipped in and took up a place against the opposite wall, as if he were guarding another door that no one else could see. So they say, John said. And now you've a king at your wall, Mance said. His eyes were amused. They had not lost that. Do they say that too? They do, John said. He handed through the bars a little loaf with a heel of hard cheese and a small dish of stewed apple that had been nearly more skin than flesh when it went into the pot. He has agreed not to burn men under our wall. Kind of him, Mance said. He ate the bread and the cheese without manner, and then took his time with the apple. What will he do with me instead? Burn you somewhere else, if burn you he must, John said. But not under the wall. Mance laughed. One soft bark, no more. Words. Men love their words. Every one of them believes the right ones will keep the knife out of his ribs. They are all we have, John said. They're all you have because you believe in them, Mance said. We had snow and the truth that if we did not run, the dead would teach us what we had always refused to learn. We ran. Your wall's as good a place to stop as any. Better maybe. But it is not words that make it so. It is ice. John thought of the letter and of Stannis' seal sunk in the red wax. Ice melts, he said. Everything melts, Mance said. Some things only more slowly. What is it you want of me, boy? I want you to live, Jon said, for some while longer, until we have done with what we must do. The king's men will not. They would make a show of you. The queen's men would make a fire. I would have neither. And how will you do that? Will you put that wolf of yours in the way? Will you stand there yourself with your hand on your sword? A little humor lifted Mance's lip. That I should like to see. I have other ways, Jon said. Though he had none yet, only a sense that the letter was the beginning of a thing, and not its end. Mance tore the last of the bread with his teeth, and chewed as if each bite would be his last. Stannis thinks a king means a man to bend the world, he said when he had swallowed. A boy like you thinks the world can be spoken to, coaxed by the right tone into good behavior. You are both wrong. The world is what it is, and will grind us to flour while we throw words at it. He tipped his head back to rest it against the ice. If you can keep me from the fire, do. I have no love for flames, nor for the way the red woman looks at me as if I were already ashes. But I will not crawl like a dog for another day in such a kennel. I would not ask you to, Jon said. Oh, you'd ask, Mance said, but not unkindly. You would ask if you needed to, but maybe you do not need to yet. Jon left him. Outside the cell, his breath made light little clouds. He did not know yet what he had promised, and had not promised, only that he had set his feet on something that shifted underfoot like new ice. The queen's men made their attempt at noon. Jon smelled the resin first, a sharp reek with pine in it, and a sweetness that belonged to summer. He came out into the yard to find a little procession moving like a bug up the spine of the wall. 2 men carrying a bundle of sticks apiece, a third with a jar of oil, a fourth holding high the stiff red banner of the burning heart. Melisandre walked behind them like a shadow wearing sunlight. The men sang in a low tone that seemed too warm for the air. The song had words in it no one on the wall knew, or perhaps all men know them and only pretend they do not. Bowen Marsh stood by the gate, his face the color it became when he had had too much wine and too much fear. You will not, he said to Melisandre, because Stannis was not there to say it to. You will not put your stake here. Melisandre smiled. We only mean to honor our God. You can honor him by keeping him warm with your bodies, Marsh said. And Jon thought the words too fine for the man who had spoken them. This is our yard. Your yard is the hinge of the world, Melisandre said. It is a pity to let it rust. It will rust faster with oil poured on it, Jon said. Your Graces, lady, you have the king's seal against such things. We have recognized him. Let him recognize us. She considered him as if he were something on a plate whose bones she hadn't decided how to pick. So fierce, she said at last. So young. Very well. She lifted a hand and the men behind her stopped at once, as if they had been bound to the motion of that hand by cords. We will honor our God elsewhere, tonight in the cold, where he can taste our breath and know it. Behind your lines, Jon said. It felt foolish the instant he had said it, as if she would argue like a captain. Wherever the Lord of Light is, she said, which is to say everywhere. They withdrew without further word. Bowen Marsh sagged, a sight that made Jon think of thawing meat. They will test you again, Jon said to him. They will test us, Marsh said. The day I am a good man for any test is the day I die. What do you call today? Jon asked. Ungenerous, Marsh said. Do not stand there like a statue. We have work. The east arch is groaning like an old man. If it falls, we won't have a yard to argue over. Word from Eastwatch came with the second sunset, after the ravens left. Cotter Pike had written it in a hand like a storm in a bottle, the ink blotting, words crossing into one another, as if they were in a hurry to get out of his head and fall over the edge. You're clever like a woman, Pike had written. Neutrality is a word to hide under when the arrows start, but it's better than hiding under nothing. If the king keeps his fires back from our fences, I will not shit on your letter and send it back to you, though it deserves it for the 7 times you had to say we take no part. We have a ship in from Loreth that says White Harbor is feeding you bread if you ask, and that the Manderleys have a boy who plays at Lord while the father eats. I would like to see such a boy whipped. Send nails. Send rope. We will keep the sea quiet for now. If there is a king at the wall, he can have his place for a winter. In the spring the sea will be a king's again, but by then he will be lee of your letter. And Denny's Malister at the Shadow Tower sent a neat, sad little note like lace. "You have done what you could," he wrote. "I approve of anything that gives us language to use with men who think they can own us. The men of the Shadow Tower are content if the Queen's men are kept out of our kitchens. They distrust women who look at fires as if they were lovers. There is a murmuring among the small folk at the foot of our stair. They have seen red lights in the woods at night. It may be nothing. It may be something. I share it with you that we may both have company in our disquiet." Then John read both aloud to Maester Aemon, and felt the old man's sour breath warm the air a little. "It is a beginning," Aemon said. "We will need more than words." "We will need food," John said. "Yes," Aemon said. "And men, and a winter that is not as long as the last one." Men came from the king's camp that night, not to set fires but to seek judgments. Two quarreled over a shield whose paint had worn from so much impact that the original device was gone, and only a suspicion of something antlered remained. A third said the first two had stolen it from him when he was shitting. "We ask for the king," they said stubbornly, staring at John as if daring him to deny them. "Ask him then," John said, and watched their surprise. "You will have a court at dawn. It will sit in the yard. The king will decide. And if we fight tonight, then you will go before him bruised," John said, "and with a broken nose, or a split brow, or a finger missing. He may take that into account when he decides who is the greater fool." "And no," they muttered, and went away. John stood in the yard and looked up at the sky. Clouds had come in where there had been stars, and it had begun to snow in a lazy way, as if the clouds were not certain yet how much they had to give. He breathed in the smell of it, clean and thin. Ghost shook himself and settled at John's boot, resting his long jaw on Joan's foot, as if to remind him he still had one. He dreamed of Winterfell that night, though he did not mean to, and never had. In the dream, the God's Wood looked as it had the last day he had seen it. The leaves black and red all at once, and the pool wearing a skin that did not quite freeze. He felt the words in the tree as sound, and saw none upon its face, and wanted to set his cheek against the trunk, but could not because he had a sword in his hand, and it had gotten between him and the bark. When he woke, he found his hand had gone to Longclaw's hilt, without asking him. Ghost lay beside him like a promise. The court held at dawn beneath the white tower was a strange thing, not least because it had to be a thing at all. Stannis sat on a chair borrowed from the shield hall, and made no effort to dress it up. The shield with the antlers returned to its owner, though not before Stannis made the three men describe it in turn as they remembered it. "If the device is worn," Stannis said to them, "paint it anew. The world must know whose men you are." "They are yours," Davos said softly afterward, as if reminding him. Stannis heard him and did not answer. By mid-morning the sun came through a slit in the clouds and made the yard a bright white eye turned up to the sky. Men squinted. The Queen's men came to stand with their hands tucked into their sleeves, red cloth vivid as blood in fresh snow. Melisandre watched the court as if it were a game played for her. When the court rose and men drifted away into work and camp, and the quiet that follows any ritual, as nervy and restless as animals after mating, she came to John and stood a pace away. "You dream," she said. "So do all men," John said. "You dream of trees. I grew up under them, and you think to shelter yourself beneath them now." She said, "Whatever words you write, whatever seals you beg and receive, the long night will come, and the fire will ask its price." "The night will come whether or not the fire asks," John said. "Our vow was to stand in it." "You do not know what you are," she said, and there was a look in her eyes as if she had put him on a scale and found him lighter than she had hoped, and heavier than she had feared. "But you will. Your blood knows. It calls to itself." "I am the blood of Winterfell," he said. He did not add which blood, or how little, or how much. He did not know himself. "Do not be so sure. she said. "Do not be so small." She went away without further word, and the air felt colder after she left. A group of hillmen arrived that afternoon, wrapped in wolfskins and lank hair, led by a big-shouldered man whose brow had the permanent squint of someone accustomed to squinting at snow. They came brash, too many of them for the little gate, each pressing at the other's shoulders and calling out to the Black Brothers with the thick vowels of the northern hills. "We heard there was a king," the leader said, and when he saw Stannis he laughed, once, like a dog. "So there is. What do you want of Wool, King?" "I want your oaths," Stannis said, and did not stand to say it. "And what will you give?" the Wool said. He shifted the strap of his axe. "Oaths are meat to a hungry man, and wine to one with a full belly." "I will give justice," Stannis said, "and laws the same for your sons as for any lords. And I will give you enemies if you prefer them to friends." The Wool spat in the snow. It made a sharp, dark crater. "We have enemies of our own," he said. "We have had them our lives and our fathers' lives. We do not need a king to give us more. But if you want to count us for you and yours, you might count us. We are not the ones who bend." His gaze went at last to Jon. "You," he said. Jon lifted his chin. "May? You look like someone I knew once," the Wool said. "He was an honest man and dead now. If you speak for this king, say so. If you do not, say that." "Then I speak for the wall," Jon said. "That speaks for itself," the Wool said. "Then we will drink and consider." He strode away toward the cook fires as if he owned them. "Charming," Davos said by Jon's elbow. "Better men than charming," Jon said. He watched the Wool set his hands by the fire as if he and it were old friends who had quarreled but meant to be reconciled. He will not give his oath, but he will not break bread with a man and then lift his axe. "You keep a ledger in your head," Davos said. "Debits and loves." "Debts and oaths," Jon said. "I do not keep it. The world writes in it whether I ask it to or not." Deep night came early the next day, heavy and blue and full of needles. It brought snow enough to bury old tracks and certain thoughts that had seemed to have teeth. Jon took the late patrol along the west parapet and found himself thinking of a night half a year past, when he had climbed here with Corin Halfhand and looked out into the wilderness that had been the whole world until then. Men had been riding across it unseen for generations, slipping between its pines like fish, leaving little behind but bones. The whites were out there too. The thought of them made his skin run with 1,000 small feet. "Cold, dolorous Ed," he said, appearing from nowhere to share the parapet. The wind had a way of bruising even the voice. It keeps finding new meanings for the same word. "The snow packs the crevices," Jon said. "That's good. Everything's good if you care to marry it," Ed said. "I'd rather marry a fat woman than a wall of ice, but I have not been asked to do either." He looked out over the plain. Stannis' camp glowed as if the ground had turned to coal and retained some memory of fire. "Do you think we did a thing?" he asked after a bit. "Or only made noise so we would not hear the other noises?" "We did a thing," Jon said. He worked his fingers under his gloves and willed the blood to move. Ed grunted. "I hope it was the right thing." "It was a thing that will last to morning," Jon said. "And then we will see." Morning brought a pale sky and word from the south. A small man in a white cloak on a gray horse came in with a raven perched on his wrist like a strange glove. He rode like a man who had not seen a decent road in months, and did not expect to see one ever again. He sat carefully and moved as little as possible, as if fear were a cloak around him that would shake off if he made the wrong motion. He asked for the king and the Lord Commander in one breath, and when told there was as yet no Lord Commander, asked for whoever owned the ravens, as if birds might do what men could not. He had a letter with the merman of Manderley stamped deep into green wax. Davos took it to Stannis. Jon stood in the yard in the small crowd that assembled whether invited or not. Tension pulled like a harpstring from tent edge to tower, from brazier to coat hook. When the king emerged, he had 2 pieces of parchment folded under his arm, and something a little less hard in his eyes. "White Harbor feeds us," he said, not loudly, but the yard made it loud by how it received it. "Bread and salted fish, to be delivered to Eastwatch under flag, and to be drawn up to the castles as we require. The Lord of White Harbor acknowledges our presence at the wall. He did not read the rest, and he wonders what we will do with it. Ace to be king, John murmured, almost to himself. Stannis heard him, or perhaps he had already been thinking it. He lifted his chin. We will use it, he said. We will use it as a forge uses iron. Send to him, he told Davos, with thanks and with the seal upon our acceptance. Ask him for mummers as well as bread. We have men here who have forgotten how to be human. Mummers, your grace? Davos' voice made it a question only because it was his duty not to make it a rebuke. Men who tell stories, Stannis said, almost impatient. Songs? Ain. Guests. His mouth skewed as if he had tasted something gone sour. It would do the Queen's men good to hear a jest that does not end at a stake. Melisandre, who had been standing very still by the tent flap, turned her face toward Jon without moving her body. For a moment, he had the sensation of standing at a window on a very high tower and leaning out a little too far. Then she blinked, and the feeling passed. They set men with shovels to clear the causeway to the east gate that day, and men with axes to hack away at the ice that had grown like a second wall under the bridge that led from the granaries to the armory. Othel Yarwick oversaw the work with his usual quiet, the thing in him that took contentment from a straight line and a repair foundation that did not sink more obvious in these moments than in any talk. If we had a summer, he said to Jon as they stood to watch the men heave a chunk of blue-green ice away together, I would build you a tower that would not tremble when you sneezed. As it is, I can give you a tower that will not fall when you breathe on it. Nah. I will settle for that, Jon said. He had meant it lightly, but as soon as he spoke, he heard the weight in his voice and knew it fit. Thank you, Othel. Thank the gods we still have wood, Othel said. And men who would rather work than talk about kings. It went on like that for some days. New work each morning, courts when there were disputes, occasional sharp words in the yard clattering against the letter's iron shape and falling off it without doing harm. The Queen's men kept their brazier ceremonies beyond the palisade and threw back their heads and chanted their fire songs while the snow fell into their mouths like a benediction. Melisandre came and went as if the cold were only a curiosity to her. Ghost hunted at night, returning with the white shapes of hairs limp in his jaws. Blood like black ink in the morning light. Jon dreamed sometimes of hands that had never touched him, turning pages of an old book in a room where the walls were made of light. He woke from such dreams hungry. On the 7th day, after the letter had gone out, a small party of free folk came under a rag, held up on a stick. It was a shirt, originally white. Now it was a near color. There were 3 women and a boy, and a man whose left arm ended in a stump neatly bound in a strip of seal leather. We have news, the man said to Jon. He eyed Ghost warily but did not back away from him. Tormund Giantsbane sends greetings and asks whether your king burns in his tents. If he does, he will come and piss on the ashes. If not, he will come and speak. Not to bend, he added, and the boy laughed at the look on Jon's face as if he had said something witty. Tell Tormund, Jon said, that our king keeps his fires small and his justice public. Tell him we would speak with him. Tell him there is bread here for his children and for his women, if he will keep his men's knives sheathed, until we have agreed how we might keep them sheathed. The man nodded. He said you'd say something like that. Tormund knows me, Jon said. The wildling with the big mouth knows everyone, the boy said, and one of the women cuffed him lightly. They were given stew and a place at the long table that had once been set for 40 and was now commonly set for 6 and 20 at a pinch. They ate like people who had made peace with hunger long ago and did not hold it against anyone when it came back to visit. When they left, the woman who had not spoken at all touched Jon's sleeve and lifted her eyes to his. There are dead things in the woods, she said softly. Not men, not beasts. There was a thing with a face like a fish, and it walked where no water was. Jon's mouth went dry. Where? Near White Tree, she said. On a night when the sky never moved. We will keep more torches on the parapets at night, John said to Bowen Marsh. And to Othel Yarwick, and to Dinny's Mallister by Raven. We will set a double watch. If any man removes his gloves and his hands are red, send him to the maester at once. The snow came heavier then, as if the sky had been listening and decided to respond like a contrary child. Work slowed, voices grew rough and short. Tempers found small twigs to catch and flared up. Stannis held court twice a day because he said it was good for the men to have some place to put their anger. One morning, a boy in the Queen's colors struck a ranger of the watch across the face with a glove and demanded satisfaction in the old southern fashion. John said, "We don't do that here," and Stannis said, "Nor do I permit my men to beat yours for the novelty of it." And the two of them had a moment where their eyes met, and they recognized each other as men standing on the same small island with a rising black tide all around. That night John found Melisandre standing alone by the fire in the yard. Her hands were held open over the flames as if she meant to warm them, but the heat did not seem to trouble her or touch her much. The light ran up her arms and made of her a column, red in its depths where any other fire-lit flesh would have been gold. "We will do it soon," she said without turning her head, and John knew she did not mean a thing he had been ready to argue. "Do what?" he asked. "The king's burning," she said. "Not here. Not under your wall." She glanced sidelong at him, and there was mischief in that glance, a child's wickedness. "Do not worry yourself, Jon Snow. I remember your letter. A man can remember two things at once." He thought of Mance Rayder then so hard and fast, it was as if the thought were a thing he had thrown. "No," he said before he had a plan to go with the word. She smiled. "You say no to me, as if I were a sow in the next pen. It is charming. It is what the old men like in you. It is why the young ones want to follow you." "What burning?" he asked, and his voice did not tremble. He took pride in that later, though there was no one to hear it. "You will see," she said. "You will see far more than you want to." Dawn broke, and the sky did not brighten. The world stayed blue for hours while men went about in it, as if it were a room someone had forgotten to bring the lamp to. A horn sounded once from the west watch, thin and wary. Another answered from the east. They were not the long, deep notes that meant anything. They were the little nervous sounds men make, so they will not be the only ones making them. The burning, when it came, was not under the wall, nor in the yard, nor within the king's camp. It took place on a low hill south of the palisade where the snow lay in drifts that came to a man's thigh. Stannis stood with his cloak thrown back, and the stag bright as a shard of sunlight on his breast. The stake had been built with care and a sort of stubborn sincerity. Like everything the king put his hand to, a man was bound there, hair wild, beard with ice in it, eyes wide and proud, and so full of being alive that the sight of them set Jon's teeth on edge. It was not Mance Rayder. It was another, the Lord of Bones, Rattleshirt, the man with the armor of dead men's bones, though the bones had been taken from him and replaced with rough cloth. The moment Jon recognized him, his breath went out of him, and the world came back like a blow. He found Maester Aemon's chair beside him, empty, but for its own dignity. He had not brought the Maester to see this, nor Bowen Marsh, nor those who would only make of it a thing larger than it was. Jon stood with Ghost and with Davos, silent. The Queen's men chanted. Melisandre spoke a word, and the fire took. The smell of hair and old sweat, and the way a man's breath becomes the last thing he has when the fire takes it. It all came up like a memory that men have carried since caves. Rattleshirt screamed. Then he screamed again, and his voice went up and up until it was not a man's voice at all anymore, but a thin wire drawn tight, and then that snapped. Jon stood as still as he could, and did not move when the wind brought the smell into his hair and clothes, and set it there like a hand. "What does this do?" Davos asked Melisandre when the fire had done its work, and the bone man was a black thing curling in on itself. The Onion Knight's voice had the roughness of a man who had been shouting in a gale without knowing it. "It sends a message," Melisandre said. "To whom?" Davos demanded. "To the darkness," she said. "To the things that wake there. To the king. To the boy. Her eyes slid to John. To everyone. John thought of the letter again, and of the hard, narrow bridge Aemon had named it, and of how men walk such bridges because the ground on either side would not bear them. He thought of Mance Rayder in his ice cell, and of the woman who had touched his sleeve, and spoken of a fish-faced thing walking out of water. He thought of Stannis using the wall as a place to be king. He thought of the North and of men with their own laws who would be asked to bend to southern ones, or be ground small as meal between them. That night he went to Maester Aemon and said, "I want to be Lord Commander." The old man's blind eyes turned toward him. "At last," he said. "It is time for someone to want the work for the work's sake." "I do not," John said. "I want it because if we do not set a hand upon the tiller, soon the ship will go where it pleases, and it will please someone we may not like." "Then you want it for the work's sake," Aemon said, and smiled a little in the corner of his mouth. "You will find a way to make men believe they chose it themselves. That is the part no one has time to teach. So you will teach yourself by doing it and failing and doing it again. Send for Samwell Tarly." "Menamchan." "Sam is gone," John said. "Or soon will be." "Send before he goes," Aemon said. "There is more than one kind of letter to be written." John left him and stood the rest of the night upon the wall, until his feet were numb and his eyes burned, and the sky went from iron to lead to white. The world below lay hushed, as if it had been pressed flat beneath a hand. In the far distance, a line of black sunspots moved along the edge of a wood. Elk, perhaps, or men. The shadow those dots cast did not move with them. He touched Ghost's neck and found the fur colder than his hand. When the sun rose, yellow and small, he went down and began. He spoke to Othel Yarwick first, because the builder liked the simplest words. "We need a commander," John said. "We need one yesterday. If we do not choose one, someone else will choose him for us. If the Queen's men manage it, we will be a garrison for their fires. If the King manages it, we will be a piece on his board. If Janos Slynt manages it, we will be fools. I cannot permit any of those." Then what do you want me to do?" Othel asked. "Choose," John said. "Choose out loud and early, and make others follow your choosing. Not because of me, because of the work. Because you like your lintels straight." Othel stared at him, then threw back his head and laughed in one bark. "You know me," he said. "Very well. I choose. I choose you." He spoke to Bowen Marsh. That one he went to with care, for Marsh was a man built from soft things that had grown hard, only because winter had left them no choice. "I do not have your liking," John said. "But we need law. You say that more often than anyone. Law and bread and patience. I can give you 2 of those. I will need your help for the 3rd. "You will not have it," Marsh said without pause. "Nor my vote." "I know," John said. "I would still have your patience." "You may have that whether you want it or not," Marsh said. "I am a patient man. I will wait and wait until one day I cannot wait, and then a thing will happen and everyone will say, 'That was quick.'" He spoke to Dolorous Ed and to the other men who lived on the line between laughter and despair. He spoke to Septon Celador and let the man talk until he was talked out, and then said only, "Which would you rather bless, a sword in the hand of a man who will not use it, or a letter in the hand of a man who can wield it?" He spoke in the yard, where those who did not want to hear him could not help but hear anyway, and under the wall, where voices carry in an odd way that makes men listen because they are hearing themselves. He spoke to Janos Slynt only once, and in public, and said, "I will not force any man, but I will not be forced, and let the man's sputter drown itself in its own spit." It was slow, and it was as much waiting as doing, as all important things are. It made of the letter a second letter, one written with glances and small touches, favors done without note, anger swallowed, kind words kneaded like dough until they could rise. Somewhere in the midst of all that, Tormund Giantsbane came to the wall and made the yard ring with his voice and his laugh and the way he clapped men on the shoulder so they staggered as if hit. He did not bend. He drank and said, "We will keep our knives sheathed until the dead walk," and laughed again when men did not laugh with him, and then sobered and said, "Oh, they walk." It is a joke only in the way that being alive is a joke played on everything dead. Stannis took the hillmen's oaths in a ceremony that had all the warmth of a blade being sharpened. He sent Davos to White Harbor with words that might be used as a bridge elsewhere. He granted audience to a Karstark nephew with a narrow head, who slipped in like a fox and said he had news of a treachery that would open the north like a tin. He allowed Melisandre to burn her small fires and to look through the flames as if they were windows, and when she spoke the name Azor Ahai he said nothing, and when she spoke the name Jon Snow he said nothing, and when she spoke no names at all he said nothing. He liked words when he said them, and not at other times. At last the day came when the brothers gathered and made a sound like 100 small rivers, all flowing toward the same fall. Snow fell on their shoulders and stuck there in stars. They smelled of old leather and old wood and onions and iron, and of fear, and of something else that might have been hope if a man were foolish enough to name it. They spoke, one after another, and the names went up and the names came down. When at last Samwell Tarly stepped forward from a corner where men had not noticed him and began to talk in that way of his that seemed to stammer, and then did not, Jon stood with his hands behind his back and watched the little theater play itself out as if he had not known every line of it by heart. "They will not burn men under our wall," Sam said at one point, very simply. "They will not judge us for our vows. They will not make us ride where we do not. But they will ask us to do all those things if we do not have a man to tell them no, in a voice that sounds like the wall itself." I have heard that voice. It is this one. Nemchawa. He gestured, and Jon felt the gesture like a touch between his shoulder blades. He did not turn. He did not breathe until it was done. When the vote was counted, it was not clean, because nothing ever was. It was enough. Jon felt the weight of it drop around his shoulders like a cloak still warm from a man who had only just taken it off. Afterward, when he had put on the black cloak that was now his twice over, he went atop the wall one last time as steward and asked Ghost to sit with him a while. The wind worried at him like a cat. The camps below looked smaller than they had, or perhaps he had grown taller. Though he did not feel it and did not want it, he watched the snow take their shapes and blur them. He thought of the letter, of kings and burnt men, of a court held under a yellow sun, of dreams of trees and of books made of light, of Stannis' silence and Davos' small, true words, of Aemon's thin laugh. A place to be king, he thought, and a place to be a wall. Some things could be both for a time, if men held steady. He rose then and went down to write a different kind of letter, one with his name at the bottom, the letters of it black as ravens' feet against the pale. He would send it to lords who did not love him, and queens who would not care, and to men in furs who did not spell their names, but wove them from the way they held their axes. He would send it to the sea. He would send it to the dead without knowing how. He would write it again and again, in words and in deeds, until the ink ran out, or his hand did. By sunset, the brothers had come to him in ones and twos, and then in threes and fours, and at last in a long, slow trickle that had the sound of a thaw. They asked him what he would do about food and about fires, and about the free folk lying in the snow beyond the palisade, and about the king's men who had started a fight in the latrines. He answered until he could not feel the place inside him that made answers. Then he stood alone and faced the yard where Stannis' court would set again at dawn, and for a moment he saw not men but the shapes their heat made in the air, softly wavering, fragile as breath. Behind him the wall spoke. It said what it had said for thousands of years, in a voice like ice. He listened, and the words were not words, and he understood them anyway. He went on listening until the dark took the yard, and the only lights were the small stubborn ones men set and shielded with their hands. That night the wind turned, and the smell that came with it was clean and thin and as full of omens as a priest's book. The ravens settled with their heads under their wings. Somewhere in the woods between here and White Tree, something moved and did not breathe. In the king's tent, a man with no fingers on one hand sat with a quill and wrote the name of White Harbor again and again until it stopped looking like a name. In the ice cell, Mance Rayder dreamed of a song with no verses. In a room where a fire had been lit, an old blind man reached for a cup and found it where he had left it without sight, as he always did. At the wall, A new Lord Commander slept sitting upright, boots on, hands folded, because he had meant to rise again after a few breaths, and had not. The dream he fell into was not of trees or fires. He dreamed of a bridge narrow as a word. He dreamed of men walking it in twos and threes, and sometimes alone, their eyes on their feet, their hands held out to balance. And he dreamed of the ones who fell to either side and were swallowed up. And he woke with a taste of iron in his mouth, and his heart like a small animal trying to get out of a trap. He stood. He went to work. He did not know that far to the south a fat man with a fine ring was reading his letter and smiling, or that to the east a ship with a broken mast limped toward Eastwatch with 50 barrels of grain and one hold full of rumors. He did not know that in the snow beyond the palisade, a woman with a boy under her cloak had counted to 100, and then to another 100, and then decided to be brave and rise and walk to the gate. He did not know that in the king's camp, a man with the burning heart on his sleeve would go to his bed and pray and dream of a steak, and of the moment when his prayer had been a little less hungry than his fear. He knew only the work. He knew only that the letter had been a beginning. He knew only that the wall did not care what it was used for, so long as it was used. He knew only that he had to make of neutrality a shape that men could lean against, and of recognition a leash that did not tighten except when it must. He knew only the next hour, and then the next, and then the long night when small lights are all that stand between men and the dark, and that to keep those lights burning you need more than words, and men to carry them, and hands to shield them when the wind comes hard. When the wind did come hard, later that night, it brought with it a sound from far beyond the trees, a thin keen like the edge of a knife drawn across bone. Men on the parapet straightened and looked at one another and said nothing. Ghost lifted his head. Jon Snow went to the base of the wall and set his hand against it, and stood there with his eyes closed, and felt through the stone and the ice and the long veins of frozen water that ran like an old man's scars within it, the world moving with slow sincerity toward them. He thought then of the bridge in his dream, and of the men who had fallen from it. He thought of Stannis Baratheon, and Davos Seaworth, and Melisandre of Ashai. He thought of the wool, and of Tormund, and of Mance bound to his dark. He thought of Maester Aemon and the letters that carried the shape of the world upon their thin skins. He thought of his father's words, though they came to him now in Aemon's voice. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. He had known those words as comfort once. Now they were an instruction. He went back to the yard where men stood in little knots shivering and talking of nothing. So they would not talk of what the wind had said. And he made of them a pack by putting them to work. Before midnight, the king sent for him. Stannis stood by a table with his knuckles on it, considered the plain, as if by looking long enough he would see the road he wanted open by dint of will. "Your letter was a small thing," he said without preamble. "It was," Jon said. "It was the right small thing," Stannis said. "We will make a larger one soon, if the gods do not put their hands in it. I will require your walls ladders, and men who can carry them." Then Darrell. "For what?" Jon asked, though he had a guess. "For a road where there is none," Stannis said, and showed his teeth, which was as near a smile as he allowed himself. "You said it yourself. Place. A place to be king. I will not be king of tents and piss. I will be king of men and stones. We will take a holdfast before the snows erase it. We will say to the north, I am here." Jon thought of the letter. He thought of the bridge. He thought of taking a piece of the world and making it something else by naming it. "Do it," he said. "Do it under our eyes. Do it with our ladders. Do it quickly. Do it without fires." Stannis grunted. "You set terms to your king," he said without rancor. "I set terms to my wall," Jon said. "You have set them under your seal already." "So I have," Stannis said, and picked up the seal and pressed it into hot wax as if to prove it. Jon went out to the night, and the snow took him up like a thing it had been making room for, and he lifted his face to it and felt the flakes melt on his lips like small, cold truths. He tasted them, and he did not speak. He went where he had to, and he did as he must. And the wind wrote its own letters on his cheeks that would not last until morning, but would sting now, and that was enough. The night deepened. The wall abided. Somewhere far away, a fish-faced thing walked, where there was no water, and turned its head toward the south as if hearing a name. Somewhere nearer, a man woke from a dream of trees, and did not know he had been thinking of a boy on a narrow bridge. Somewhere nearer still, men in black slept two to a pallet, and breathed each other's warm breath, and without meaning to, kept each other alive. And in the Lord Commander's room, Jon Snow set down his quill, saw the ink freeze in its tip, and dipped it again without swearing. He had words to write yet, and then more words to say, and after that deeds to make of them. The wall was a place to write such things. It took the ink thin and the lines strange, but the letters held. For now, that was enough. For now, that would have to be. Okay. Snow made a new world every morning, and men went out and ruined it. Jon Snow watched them do it, and sent more men after them with shovels and sledges, and sent still more to the lantern stores to fetch oil, and to the woodlots to stake out what could be cut without leaving the next man blind. He rose in the gray before dawn and listened to the wall creak in its bones. And he lay down again when the last of the watch came in with faces raw and red as meat. Between rising and laying down he spent his words like coin, and found that the purse never quite emptied and never quite filled. He learned the small daily tyrannies of being obeyed. A lad too young for his mail stood too long at the east parapet, and his fingers froze to the iron. Jon sent him down himself, and the boy cried when the blood came back into them, and tried to hide it. And Jon stood with him anyway, until the crying turned to hiccups, and then to snot. A man with an old wound in his thigh began to limp when he thought no one would notice, and then stopped limping when spoken to. Jon set him to the soup pots for a fortnight, and listened to the curses he saved for the steam. 2 rangers quarreled with Queen's men over a kettle, and the kettle became a cause worth dying for, until Jon set it on the table between them, and had them eat from it with spoons like brothers, and the soup tasted of iron for everyone. The letter had taken. He could feel its shape underfoot like a plank that did not shift. Stannis' men brought their quarrels to the Dawn Court, and he sat at the king's left hand, and watched judgments fall like the hard edge of a spade. The watch business he held in the shield hall, with its cold breath and old shields, under the eye of the broken antlers and flaking calves and the dragon that had faded to a rust shade, no smith would claim. He forbade burning beneath the wall, and the Queen's men obeyed with the bright silent obedience that belongs to hatred as much as it does to love. Melisandre smiled at him sometimes as if they shared a jest he had not yet heard. He did not give her the courtesy of asking for the punchline. On the 3rd morning, Eastwatch sent a raven with a scrap of sailcloth tied to its leg to keep the wind from unbalancing it. The scrap smelled of tar and brine, and Cotter Pike's hand smelled of both as well. The words lurched across the page like a man drunk on a pitching deck. 2 manderly cogs in sight and a 3rd astern, fat and slow. They bring bread, salt fish, pickled beets, onions, a barrel of laughter you can uncork on cold nights, and 2 men with instruments who swear they are mummers. They have been paid enough to be liars. If your king wants them, he can have them, and if he does not, I will set them to scrub the ice from my pier with a fiddle and a drum. Jon took the letter to Stannis before the king called court. Davos Seaworth was with him, and the Red Woman in her place like a candle no one had snuffed. And Jon felt the odd sense he always felt in that tent, as if words hung from the ridgepole like game, some bleeding and some still twitching. Bread, Stannis said, and his mouth moved around the simple word with a care that made it into something else. Have it brought to Eastwatch, as offered. We will draw it along the coast to the Shadow Tower where we can, and up by sled where we cannot. Send men with the seal. Men who will not steal a heel for their pockets. Then Durstow. We have those, Jon said, and saw Davos glance at him. Quick and measuring as always. And the mummers? Davos asked, because Stannis would not ask the thing he wanted to ask if he could ask another first. We will have them, Stannis said, barely grudging. The men are growing thin on more than soup. His gaze went to Melisandre, and if there was reproof in it, it did not show. A jest that does not end at a stake, I said. We will see if such a thing exists. It does, Davos said mildly. It used to. Would you like to smile, Onion Knight? Stannis asked. You may practice now. Better to have it in hand than to try for it cold before men. Davos' mouth twitched. I will practice, your grace. Jon left them and went to the yard with his own lists. He sent Othel Yarwick to find men who could shape ladders quickly and to cut what wood would not cost them a winter next winter. Long rungs, thick sides, he said, and Othel's eyes warmed a little. Craftsmen speaking to craftsmen. Stannis will have need of them in the west. Deep wood, Yarwick said without being told. If he can carry ladders that far through this shit, he can carry a castle on his back as well. I'll make them as light as I can without making them dangerous. It's the way of such things. It is, Jon said. He took the thought away with him to chew on, as one chews fat in the absence of meat. If the king took deep wood and the Glovers came in, there would be men in wool and not in mail living to the south of the gift. Men who would want small things, salt and iron, grain and oatcakes for the road, and larger ones, oaths, judgments, a word that made sense of the snow and the work and their hunger. The watch could give them the small things. The larger ones belonged to a king. He had built a bridge for Stannis to stride upon. He had to hope now that the king did not stamp too heavily or dance. Before the Manderley cogs came, another sighting came out of the east like a bad dream someone had put wings on. A crewman from a Lorathi trader had staggered off a skiff at Pike's Pier and poured out words like broken teeth onto the planks. Hardhome. Smoke at night. Lights like fallen stars on the cliffs. Dead men that made other dead men. The Lorathi captain would not go near again. Pike cursed him for a coward in one line and called him the only sensible man on the sea in the next. Jon read that letter twice and a third time as if other words might appear if he warmed the page with his breath. Hardhome. A whisper of a place. A word, rangers told, because they loved the taste of it. The way it formed in the throat like something soft and then snapped with the last consonant. A camp of years long gone. A port that had never been a port. 100 rumors, each worse than the last. He thought of Tormund's laugh, and of the woman who had come under a rag held up on a stick to tell of a fish-faced thing that walked on dry land. He took that letter into the same tent, and watched it hang with the other words under the ridgepole. Stannis took it grimly, the way he took all things. Winter takes men from the edges first, he said. From the north and the east. It bites where men are thin and then fattens itself on them and comes for the rest. It has always been thus. There are many of them there, Jon said. Free folk who turn to the sea's edge because there was nothing left in the trees. They will break and run south when the dead come, if they have time to run. If they run, they will run at us. Then we will be ready, Stannis said. And we will not burn under your wall. It was tired, the way he said it, as if he had grown used to the shape of the bridle and did not expect to like it any better for the wearing. Stannis, Melisandre said, a warning or a caress, and her red eyes found Jon in the tense morning dimness. You should send ships with the Lord Commander's letters. You should send fire and iron bellies to bring desperate men up from the cliffs. We have few ships, Davos said, and fewer that could risk such work in that water at this time of year. Few is more than none. She said, the Lord of Light shows me a shore where the sea eats and is never full. Men stand like candle stubs and go out. If you send no ships, their smoke comes to us anyway. Davos looked at Jon. Jon looked at the map with its scratched lines and old stains and wormholes. We could send one, he said, and heard Bowen Marsh's voice in the back of his skull, adding the numbers and spending the grain they did not have, and cursing him gently for the extravagance. We could send two. Eastwatch has some small boats that can kiss the shore where a cog cannot. We can do what we can. All vows are that, Maester Aemon had said to him once long ago, before his blind eyes began to turn inward as if they were measuring his own darkness. Doing what you can and swearing it will be enough. Jon felt the weight of that again, and the knife edge on which the phrase balanced, and decided to cut his hand upon it if he must. "I will write to Pike," he said. "We will see who will go." He took the hard-home letter to Tormund Giantsbane in the long hall, where the free folk took stew with the men in black, and laughed too loudly because they knew they were not welcome, and laughed still louder because it had been too long since they were warmed together under a roof. Tormund bent the parchment across his knee and scowled at it, as if the words were a man who had lied to him. He said when he had reached the end. I had word of that from a man with frozen tears in his beard, who said his wife had been eaten by gulls before she stood up again and tried to bite him because he would not give her back the food. You will send ships? Now, we are trying, Jon said. You had better be doing, Tormund said, and slapped the back of Jon's shoulder hard enough to stagger him. Words are bread when there is no bread. I will go if you like. I will go and stand on that cliff and fart in the dead's face. You will stand nowhere if the ice takes you, Jon said. I need you here. I need you to bring your people in under our rule and not under the Red Woman's fires. And now, Tormund's eyes narrowed and then warmed, as if he had made the choice between taking offense and taking a drink, and opted for the second. You keep your words hard, Crow, he said. I will keep mine warm. Tell me this then. If I bring you 100, what will you give me? Bread, Jon said. The chance to live through this winter long enough to think about hating me in the spring. He paused. Land when spring comes. Under your wall, Tormund said. He bared his teeth. Under your rules. Under a law that will keep you from being robbed by a man with more iron than you, or burned by a man with more God, Jon said. Settle the shivering forest, the long strip along the lakes, the empty crofts in the new gift. Hunt where we say, and not where we say you cannot. Send hostages. Obey the watch sheriffs when they tell you to cut no more wood from the eastern groves or to keep your goats off the cider orchard. Knock your arrows when the watch horn cries thrice. And come when I call. North, not south. Mensau. Tormund scratched his chin with a dirty thumbnail and made a thoughtful noise. Hostages, he said, as if tasting the word. Who do you want? Your son, Jon said, because he had learned from Robb Stark that hostages meant less if they were anyone's but the one that made a man dream badly at night, and the sons of the men who will not keep their own men in check. 12 boys. Treat them well, and I will treat them well. Treat me ill, and I will treat them like the law asks a man to be treated when he breaks his word. Benti. Tormund stared at him as if they stood again on that ice-clotted narrow path where the wall fell into the world, and one man's foot on a brittle place took both tumbling with it. Then he nodded. He said. Give me a day. I will bring you boys with eyes like their fathers and hair like their mothers and hearts like wolves. You better not turn them into lamb snow. I will turn them into men, Jon said. If I can. If they will let me. Mensio Ancho. The mummers came the same day the first wagon of Manderley bread arrived at the east gate. The bread steamed where the cold took it, and men stood in a long patient line that had in it less jostle than any line men had made since the first campfire and the first loaf. The mummers were a pair, one with fingers thick as sausages who coaxed sounds out of a lute, the way a smith brings music from a blade. The other with a pipe he worried between his teeth like a lover. They wore ragged sables sewn with cheap beads, and walked like men who had been seasick and were not yet certain the world had stopped rocking. They played in the yard as the sun fell, and turned all the men's breaths to banners, and when they had played 2 songs and the silence between was awkward, they played a third, and men began to sing softly with them, because not to sing was colder than the wind. Stannis Baratheon came and stood on the edge of the crowd, cloak thrown back, face as unreadable as ice. Melisandre came and stood a little apart, the red stones at her throat and wrist winking like fox eyes through brush. Davos smiled and did not pretend he was not smiling. Dolorous Ed stood with his hands in his sleeves and did not sing, and afterward told Jon the songs had been inferior to silence, but that he preferred the inferior in this case. The piper played a Winterfell tune Jon half remembered from boys' nights in the great hall with the younger men, and the old steward who had no fingers on his left hand but could clap time with his cane. He went to the edge of the crowd then, where Stannis stood, because he had learned that moments came with their own doors, and that if you did not step through them at once, you found yourself looking instead at a blank wall. "Your Grace," he said. Stannis did not look at him. "They know how to end a song," the king said. "Most men do not. They cling to it until it whimpers." Dundee. "The wall has taught us not to cling," Jon said. "The wall has taught you to let go," Stannis said. His gaze went then to the men standing in knots with bowls in their hands, breath smoking, laughter hanging around their mouths like steam. "I will leave soon," he said, and now he did look at Jon. "The ladders." "In a day," Jon said. "2 at most. Othel has men sleeping in the wood shavings." "Good," Stannis said. "We will go by the Long Barrow Road west to the King's Road, and then north through the Wolf's Wood. The hillsmen say half the ways they know are shut by snow. The other half they swear will be passable until the moment we reach them." "Then they will be passable enough," Jon said. "They have walked them since they were boys. And if they are not, they will make a new one." Stannis' mouth moved in that way that might have been a smile on another man. "You should have been a king's maester," he said. "You speak as if you were delivering a child. You make it sound like something that can be done if men are not too proud to cry." "I have not seen a child born," Jon said. "You will," Stannis said. "If you live long enough at the wall, you see all things men do." He looked past Jon then. "Lady Red," he said, and the priestess came, lighted by nothing but herself. "You will stay," Stannis told her. "Keep the men's hearts from going small with fear. Distract them with your God. See through your flames what must be seen. Do not burn under his wall." "I will do as my God asks," Melisandre said. Her smile was for Jon. "And he asks what he always asks." "I know what he asks," Stannis said shortly. "And I know what the wall asks. We have made a bargain. Keep it." "Menorwau." She inclined her head in a motion that could have been modesty, and could have been the preparation for striking. "As you command, your grace." When she had gone, Stannis said, "She will test you. The men who follow her will test you. The men who follow me will test you. If any of my men burn under that wall while I am gone, I will come back and break the arms that built the stake, and then the arms that did not stop them." "You will not have to," Jon said. "See that I do not," Stannis said, and turned away to the piper's tune as if the conversation had been a small stone that had lodged in his boot, and he had finally pried it free. The morning the king left, the wall was so clear that the sky above it looked like water you could fall into. Jon stood on the steps up to the gatehouse with Ghost at his side, and watched the column coil and straighten, coil and straighten. The hill clans went first, feet sure on the hardpack, cheeks gold with the grease of last night's meat. The queen's men followed with their stiff banners and their braziers in carts, their fires little caged beasts already snarling for the night. Behind them came the rest in harness and on foot, bells of ice tinkling on the edges of saddles. Breath turned to mist that hung for a moment after each rider passed, as if the horses trailed ghosts from their mouths. The ladders rode in the middle on sledges, and Othel Yarwick leaned on his axe and squinted at them like a father watching his sons march away. Stannis rode under a plain black banner with the crown stag sewn small, and did not turn his head when the gate rang beneath his horse's hooves. Davos rode a step behind him with the air of a man who has put a house in order and now waits for the wind to test each shutter. "Do you wish them luck?" Ed asked, appearing as he did where men would least expect him and most need a small pinch of salt. "I wish them roads," Jon said, "and ladders that do not break." "Roads are like women," Eddie said. "They are what they are, and sometimes you love them, and sometimes they break your leg." He watched the last of the column go with a long squint. "Well, if they die, they will not have to shovel anymore." "They will shovel," Jon said. "In the next world, likely." He set his hand on Ghost's head, and the direwolf leaned into it, a wordless acceptance of a thing Jon had not said aloud. The wall felt bigger when the king went. The letters under its skin had to be enough. With Stannis gone, the Red Woman's firelight took on the quality of a rumor men repeated to themselves before sleep and woke blushing from, as if they had been caught by their own consciences. She kept to the letter's law with an exactness John had not expected, and the grace of a blade that never caught. She made small fires and watched them, and let the queen's men sing, and did not burn so much as a stray dog beneath the wall. She spoke to John rarely, and when she did, it was to lay her finger on a thing, and see if he would twitch. "You dream," she said once, "of a gray girl riding hard, and the smell of roses in the snow." "I dream of the smell of soup," John said, "and of letters that do not freeze in my hand." "You will smell the soup," she said, amused. "And the roses." Her eyes slid sideways in that way of hers that made him feel she had turned sideways in the world. "A girl in gray comes. She flees from men who would use her. There is a hound on her trail with a broken head. If you would keep your wall safe, open your gate first to her. Then she—" "I will open it," John said, because the alternative was closing it, and letting the world's foolishness harden into cruelty. And he had sworn against that when he had sworn everything else. She smiled. She knew she had planted seed. She did not know where it would sprout. He did not either. Sometimes that was mercy. The girl came a week later, so numb with cold she could barely sit a horse, and so driven with fear that she did not fall when she ought to have fallen. The gray of her cloak was the gray of river water in winter, and the horse was lathered to ice, and the roses were only a memory on the laces at her wrist, a faded stitch here and there where a lady's maid had once made a thing fine. She tore the scarf from her face with clumsy hands, and stared up at the gate with eyes that did not know yet whether they would weep. "I am Elias Karstark," she said when John stood before her, voice ragged and bred for command in equal parts. "They mean to wed me to my uncle. The law allows for such a thing." Septon Celador sat at Joan's shoulder with a drunken solemnity, and then hiccuped, and then crossed himself because even he knew he had said the wrong thing. "The law is a man with a long knife and no one to take it from him," the girl said flatly. "I rode 3 nights to get to a law that would not put me in a bed with the man who killed my brothers." John said, "You are under our roof now," and the words belonged to a man in a hall with a hearth, not to a Lord Commander standing under a wall of ice in a wind that cut. He did not take them back. "You will have hot broth and then sleep, and when you wake you will tell me everything." "Everything?" she said, suspicion and pride both warming her like wine. "Enough," John said. "Enough to know what to do." He fed her and set her to bed in a cell near the armory where the stones held warmth like bread. And when she woke she told him of Karhold and of the uncle who meant to take her to wife to hold his claim in a way the North would swallow if hungry enough, and then spit if it found meat enough for a better meal. She spoke of fear with the disdain of a lady who had been taught fear was an unseemly thing to be seen in. And she spoke of hunger with the exactness of someone who had felt it bird scratch at her belly. She did not lie. John did not think she could have done, not without making a face as a girl makes when she eats something bad and hopes to be forgiven. He took the tale to Maester Aemon, and Aemon pressed his lips together over the tastes of it, and said, "The wall is a hard bed for the North's troubles to lie in, but they will lie here whether we make room or not." "The letter," John said. "It recognizes Stannis as king for law among his own. It says nothing of a girl in gray who rides to our gate to ask us to keep her from a marriage that offends every god I was taught to know." "The letter is a plank," Aemon said. "We will use it for what we can. It will hold if we place our weight on the right part." John sat a long time after, and felt the shape of solution form like ice takes to a boot print. The then stood in the yard with their bare arms out, as if daring the cold to take a bite. Their Magnar watched with that heavy stillness that had convinced so many Southron men they were dumb. John rose and sent for him. Sigorn came like a carved thing brought to life. He stood with his arms folded while John spoke, and then unfolded them when he understood. "A lady of Karhold," he said slowly, letting the syllables test his teeth. "A marriage to the Magnar of Then. The North would not like it." The North does not have to like it, John said. It has to accept it. The letter gives us the right to make marriages for our guests and our own. The king is absent. His seal covers this yard. The law withers with the cold. When we leave it in the wind, we will set it by the fire. You are the fire I would set it by. Bendowel. The Magnar grunted. You speak like a black brother and a Southron both. He looked toward the armory where they had put the girl. Will she like it? She will live through it, John said. And if you treat her well, she may one day find she is content. If you treat her ill, I will put you in the ice cell, and see how proud thens are when their piss freezes in their beards. Bender. Sigurn bared his teeth in what the thens called a smile. My beard is better than yours, he said. But I take your meaning. Send for her. If she says yes, I will say it too. If she says no, I will say yes anyway and carry her like a stolen goat. She says for herself. John said flat. Or there is no marriage. That is the law of this yard. The girl said yes. She said it with her chin high and her eyes clear, and John thought it was the bravest thing he had seen in months. Braver than men who stood in the snow with their shirts off to prove something to themselves. Braver than a king walking out under an empty sky with ladders behind him. He set the septon to drink less and wash more, and set men to sweep the hall, and told Othel Yarwick to build a hearth that would not smoke and benches that would not tip when a then sat. He told the cooks to find honey if they had to boil beecombs for it, and to beat the eggs until their wrists ached to make a cake that would sit in the mouth like a memory. He told Dolorous E.D. to stand at the door, so the queen's men could not bring a fire with their god wrapped in it as a wedding gift. If they try, he said, throw them down the steps and blame the steps. Ed said, I have been blaming the steps for my misfortunes for years. It will be a relief to be believed. The wedding was a strange thing and a right one. The then said their few words, and the septon said too many, and the girl said the right ones in the middle with a calm face, and Sigurn put his hand over hers with a care that might have been practiced and might have been new. The hall was warm in a raw, loud way, and men ate as if food were something they had heard rumor of and had never quite believed in. Stannis was gone, and Melisandre watched with a look like curiosity, and the queen's men kept their songs to their own corner, and the brothers of the knights watch stood like ghosts at the edges, and warmed their hands in their sleeves, and tried not to think of home. The thens banged their knives on the table, and chanted a thing in their round old speech that had in it a rhythm like feet on hard ground and snow squeaking under heel. Elise Karstark sat with her shoulders squared and her mouth full of honey cake and her eyes on a middle distance that was a future she was forcing into focus. John drank a small beer and held it like a shield. Tormund came and cuffed him hard enough to spill it. You made a lord out of a savage and a lady out of a girl, the big man said with satisfaction. It's what wars do, but this is the right kind. It was a door to be opened, John said, and we needed the wind to pass. He looked toward the shadows where Queen Celis's men stood with their thin mouths pressed tight on their chants. We made law in front of them. That will have to do for the day. It will have to, Tormund said. He belched like a man who had seen a good day and did not expect another for a while. If you want me, I will be teaching that septon a proper song. They set Ailey's in the old Lord Steward's chamber with a brazier and a new woolen, with a fox-worked hem someone had taken from a chest and shaken out, and they set two then women to sleep outside the door with short knives in their boots and bowstrings wrapped around their wrists to keep their fingers on the memory of war. John took a candle to the rookery, because Maester Aemon could no longer climb even when the steps were hot, and wrote swiftly with ink warmed by the brazier. The words simple, because the simpler the words the stronger they seemed when they reached men who did not want to hear them. He told the Karstarks what had been done, and under what law, and instructed them to take any complaint to Stannis Baratheon, where he sat at court on the first holdfast he retook. He sent a copy to Stannis as well, because it seemed wise to be honest with the man to whom one had given a place to be king. When he had sanded the pages and set them to dry on a rack that had held little boats when he had been a steward, he turned and found Melisandre at the rookery door. Her presence changed even the ravens, who stopped gossiping and sat black and considering upon their perches. "You make marriages like a smith makes shoes," she said. "If you keep at it, you will shoe all the wild horses in the forest and wonder why your hands hurt." "Better my hands than someone's throat," John said. "What do you want, my lady?" "The same thing I wanted yesterday," she said. "And the same thing I will want tomorrow. The same thing the cold wants and the fire wants. The same thing every god ever named wants." "To be fed," John said. "To be obeyed," she said. She moved toward him until the heat of her reached his skin and made the cold in his bones stir. "The king will need a singer." "He has mummers," John said. "They are not good, but they are better than nothing. He will need a singer who can go where mummers cannot," she said. "A singer whose songs are knives." Her voice was very gentle. "I will take Mance Rayder out of your cell. I will put the bones of another man on his body and send him south with spearwives to pluck a false wolf from the Lannisters' trap. He will come back, or he will not. If he does, he will be yours again to chain, or to send back into the world. If he does not, he will have died doing a thing that keeps your wall from being torn." She held his gaze as if trying to teach him to look through a window he had never seen. "Do not say no to the only yes you will get this winter." He felt the world tilt. It was not the plan that stunned him. He had known something like it had been stalking the edges of her silence for days. It was the way she spoke of Mance as if he were a knife she meant to put back into a sheath. She had not yet chosen. "You burned a man," he said. "You burned Rattleshirt and called him a message. You would make Mance a message too." "I would make him a man again," she said. "He wears his fear like a cloak. Take it from him and he is naked. Let me dress him." "You are a witch," Dolores Edheed had said once, with the simple clarity of a man who had nothing left for lies. John did not say it. He said instead, "No burning under my wall. No glamour that puts a man into flame for the sake of a show." She was laughing before he finished. "You think I mistook your letter?" she asked. "I can read as well as you, boy. I will not burn him. I will unbind him. There is more than one way to make a man a new thing." She came nearer still, and he smelled something like cinnamon under the smoke. "Let me. Else you will write another letter soon, one that begins, 'To whom it may concern.' We did not do a thing when we could have done it, and the ink will freeze before you can set your name to the bottom." "Done?" "Do it," John said. Because to say no would be to own the consequences as surely as to say yes was, and because he had no stomach for owning those consequences, when his stomach was already full of 100 others. Do it without making a show of it. Do it without a stake. Do it far from my brother's eyes. And if he harms any man of mine while he is yours, I will kill him before your fire can ask for him." "Bah." "You will try," she said. It was not mockery. Men are quick with "if" when they fear a thing. She turned to go. "He will sing his song," she said from the door. "Pray your boy learns it." When she had gone, the ravens began to jabber again, and one hopped along its perch and said, "Snow, snow," in a voice like a man trying to remember where he put his boots. John fed them each a kernel of corn from the pouch that hung near the door, and went down to the yard with the taste of ash in his mouth that no food would take away. He slept badly, and when he woke before dawn with his boots still on his feet and his cloak around his shoulders, he went out to the ice cell and found it empty. The torch bracket had grown a new ring of smoke at the top like a wreath. Rattleshirt's bones were not there. They had been burned on the hill days ago. Mance Rayder was not there either. He stood in the doorway feeling the great thing above him hum in its quiet way, the wall speaking in a language of expansion and contraction, as if reminding him of what was constant. Ghost came and pressed himself into John's leg and fluffed himself against it, as if he had decided to be a wall as well. John put his hand on the direwolf's back and left it there until his fingers were warm enough to bend. Ace Karstark and Sigorn left at noon with a small escort. 2 Thens and 4 Rangers whose faces had been closed by hard winters, and the rest of the Thens jeered cheerfully as if they were sending off a man to steal a sheep. The Queen's men watched like men who had lost a small bet they had not admitted making. Melisandre watched with her smile. "You have put a seal to a war you cannot fight." She told Jon as the little party passed through the gate into a light that seemed thinner than it had been at breakfast. "I sealed a marriage," Jon said. "You sealed a claim," she said. "The dead do not care who sits in Carhold. The living care very much. Sometimes the two agree. Sometimes they do not. Pray your boy on his narrow bridge does not have to look down." "I do not pray," Jon said. "You do," she said, and left him with that, a parting gift he could not use. He could not use it, but he learned to use other things. He learned how to set men in pairs whose hatred canceled one another's until there was only work instead. He learned how to send a letter to White Harbor that did not beg and did not threaten, and yet took men from their beds and put them on sledges behind dog teams with sacks of beans in their laps. He learned to listen to the creak in the East Arch and to hear the moment when it stopped being an old man's complaint and became a danger. He learned to trust Othel when the builder said, "If we put one more burden here, the whole will sway like a drunken girl," and to trust Denys Mallister when the recipient of a letter said, "Your words are a better bridge than it seemed to me at first." He learned how to send men to Hardhome and not to hate the sea for making their boat small as a toy on a bath. He learned to give Tormund the shape of the work and then let the big man make the noise of it over the men so that they did not hear the work's name and fall in love with their own suffering. Snow fell and fell. The world narrowed to the path a man's boot made and widened again in dreams. Sometimes Ghost went out at night and came back with a jawbone in his mouth that had not known flesh for a decade, as if the direwolf had decided bones needed reminding of what they were for. Sometimes the Queen's men sang, and the flame light climbed the inside of their throats, and the sound was not a hymn, but a plea. Sometimes Melisandre stood alone under the wall, and looked up as if she expected it to fall forward into her arms. Sometimes Jon went to the gate at night, and put his palm to the iron, and felt the cold bite deep, and thought of nothing. And sometimes he thought of everything, and had to pull his hand away to keep from doing something that could not be undone. Word from the west came like faint drums. Stannis had taken a holdfast between here and there. An old timber-walled place whose name men had forgotten, and now would remember for as long as they needed to, and had sat in its yard and given audience to men named Nori and Little, who did not bend but who stood long enough that their breath made a drift before them. Stannis had set his seal to the protection of one village and the levying of grain from another, and had hung a thief by his thumb until the thief screamed and then cut him down and set him to work under watch. He had moved on. He had sent Davos to White Harbor again, by sleigh this time, because the sea had these days begun to toss itself like a man, trying to put out a fire under his own tongue. He had, according to a woman who came under a rag held up on a stick with a boy under her cloak and arms like bruised branches, spared 3 men who had been marked by the Red Woman for the flames, because the letter told him not to, and the woman had laughed when she said it, though it was not a thing that asked for laughter. Jon sent her to the kitchens, and did not ask whose men they had been. Hardhome sent back a gull with a broken wing, and a strip of leather tied around its leg. Caught her Pike's hand again, smeared and hurried, a dripping of words. Dead things in the surf. Dead things in the woods. Dead things on the cliff path, pulling men down with hands that felt like fish. He could hold the shore for a day, 2 days, but the people were mad with fear and half-starved, and would eat each other before they ate the hard biscuit he had brought. The boats he'd sent in were being dragged sideways by a tide he did not understand. The dead did not mind water. The dead do not mind anything, Pike wrote. A line that might have been wise and might have been despair. Send more boats. Send fire in the boats. Send men who do not fear what fear asks. Jon sent what he could. That was the work of this winter, to send what he could and forgive himself when it was not enough, and try again anyway. He watched men go east down the King's Road and disappear into a whiteness that took even the sound of their bells. He watched boys come to him from the free folk and stand in his yard narrow as whittled sticks, eyes hard as stones, and he named their fathers to them and put them in pairs and put them in the charge of the man least likely to be charmed by their beautiful scowls. He watched Alice Karstark's letter return with a seal he did not know, and a hand that wrote, "Treasure her," as if that were something a man could do with a ledger and a key. He watched men of the watch begin to square their shoulders when Queen's men came, and Queen's men turn their heads when watch business crossed the yard. He watched himself begin to believe that the letter might hold. When the first of the Hill clansmen came back, it was with small news told large. They spoke of a road that had been worse than any story told about it, and better than any other road, because it had not killed them. They spoke of snow that made men into shapes they did not recognize, and trees that snapped like kindling under weights that did not care about names. They spoke of Stannis' face under the frost, and of the way he looked at a fallen tree, and saw not a barrier, but a thing to stand upon, and make men climb better. They spoke of deep tracks that had frozen in high relief like sculpture, and made ladders unnecessary, in one small place for one small hour. They spoke of seeing the sea again at the end of a long cold road, like a woman you had forgotten you had loved, and of a smell of salt that made a hill man's nose wrinkle, and then made him laugh. They had taken Deepwood. The word came later, carried by a boy with a drum, the kind of boy whose mother would have beaten him for making noise indoors, and whose father would have beaten him for not making enough noise outdoors. He drummed it in the yard like a heartbeat, and men laughed at him, and then with him, and then stopped laughing, and looked at one another because they remembered the Glovers, and remembered that the North was a place where names lay like stones under snow. "Deepwood is taken," the boy said between breaths. Stannis' men climbed. The Ironborn fought, and then they broke. A woman with a hard mouth cried when Stannis told her she would see her hall again. "Asha Greyjoy," Davos said later when Jon found him in the king's tent, back not yet used to rest again. "She had a hard mouth when I saw her. It could soften. The Glovers had a harder one. It softened first." Nenatrangle. Stannis had sent back a small cart of iron and a large cart of stories. He had sent word to the Glovers and to the men in the Wolfswood that the king sat now where Ironborn had sat, and would give justice where they had not. And the hills sang, said the boy with the drum, though Jon suspected the hills sang regardless. He had sent a letter to Jon as well, one that smelled of wood smoke and the faint, warm grease of roasted meat. The latter served, Stannis had written in his tight, exacting hand, "Tell your builder that his wrongs were a pleasure beneath my fingers, and that he may expect from me his due." Jon took the letter to Othel, and watched the builder read it, and turn away with a stiff neck to hide his face, and pretended not to see the way Othel's chest rose when he breathed as if inhaling a thing finer than smoke. With Deepwood taken, the North stirred. Word from the Shadow Tower said men at the lakes had begun to bring skins to the base of the wall again, not because they loved the watch, but because they had decided again that a bargain was better than freezing to death proud. Word from Eastwatch said a ship out of Sisterton had come with a pale, bearded man, who said the Boltons would move when the snows made it impossible, and not before, like men who believed in the weight of their own names. Word from the south came with the snow, which fell and fell and fell, and set men's nerves like wires. The Queen's men grew clever at setting their braziers in places where the letter did not reach, and sang more loudly where the wall's shadow ended. Jon grew clever at finding where the letter did reach and leaned on it until it creaked. Melisandre kept her smiling distance and watched the fires in their bowls until her eyes glowed with them, and then until they went dark again. Sometimes Jon thought he smelled roses where there were none. Sometimes he smelled blood when there was only iron. The night the roses were strongest, the horns blew once from the west, and once from the east, and then once more in each direction, as if men had decided an echo would be comforting. A rider came out of the darkness at a lope that was not frantic, and yet said, "I will not stop." He slid from his saddle more than he dismounted, and pressed a scroll into Yon's hand, and fell on his face in the snow, and lay there a long time. The seal was green. The wax was cracked from cold. The hand was Lord Wyman's, round as his body, and also sly. "Bread and salt are yours," the letter said, "and men too if you would have them, and mummers aplenty if you promise not to eat them, for they are lean meat at the best of times." The merman's court will hold for the king if the king holds for the north. Justice is a dish better eaten hot. Tell your onion knight that I keep a table ready for him, though men say he has died and risen and died again." There was more, and John read it with a slow grin that surprised him on his own face. A fat man's humor, larded over something too sharp for comfort. It said what it needed to say. It did not say the thing that would have broken the letter's back. He carried it to Davos, who read it with the same little turn of the mouth, and then set it down like a plate containing a small perfect cake. Not much to look at, but what was there could be eaten with joy. "He will come," Davos said quietly, "in a way that suits him. He has lived long chewing on what is not his to swallow. He has learned to be patient with bones. The North remembers," John said, not meaning to speak aloud and startling himself when he did. The phrase was not a charm, but sometimes even men who think charms useless find their mouths making the shapes. "The North remembers its bellies," Davos said. "And its dead. They are equal measures in winter." He tapped the letter. "This helps. Everything helps," John said softly. A week later, the girl in gray's uncle arrived with 30 men and the smell of false law in his beard. He demanded his niece. He demanded his due. He demanded the respect owed his station. He demanded things like a man walking into a storm and demanding that the wind blow the other way. John met him with men beside him who had long memories and short tempers and did not have to do any more than stand. "Under our roof," John said. The slow iron words, "We make the law." He told the uncle what had been done. He showed him the letter. He told him where to take his complaint. The man's sneer grew frost on it. "You think your ice makes you king," he said. "The North will snarl half its teeth out at this. Better for everyone if you give her back now and we call it done. Better for everyone if you go back now and do not melt more of your men on the road," John said. But men seldom do what is better for anyone. He turned away then because to stay would be to argue, and he was tired of arguing with men who had only the one word in them. The uncle swore and spat and left with his 30 men and gathered 10 more on the path from Smallholds that would not see spring. The snow took them as easily as a pillow takes a head. Hardhome's letters grew thinner until they were not letters and then were only the occasional whisper. Cotter Pike sent one last word. Fire, and then a blot, and then a line that might have been the beginning of his name. John folded that one very carefully and set it where no one could put their hand on it by accident. Men came out of the woods with eyes that had seen more white than black and coughed out stories as if the coughing might expel them. A boy with frostbitten ears said a woman had tried to warm her baby over a candle and had melted the tallow instead. A man with hands like sticks said the others had ridden up to the cliff and looked down, and then had looked up to see who looked back. A girl with her hair all gone said a song had drifted down from above them that made her want to stand very still and then very much not stand at all. John sent them to the warmest corner and told them to sleep, and they smiled at him in a way that meant they would try. They tried, and then they slept. And some of them did not wake. When he had been a boy at Winterfell, they had told stories by the kitchen fire of men who could sleep themselves thin, of bears that could sleep themselves out of harm, of kings who slept while the world moved around them and woke into a better time because their subjects had done the work while they dreamed. John did not sleep. He wrote. He walked the parapets. He went down into the old tunnels, where the ice had grown whorled and green at the heart, and he put his palm against it, and remembered the first time he had touched that frozen belly. He listened to Bowen Marsh tell him gently that there would be a reckoning for the food he had fed to wildlings, and he listened to Dolorous Ed tell him that reckoning was a thing that happened to men who had eaten too much in a rich lord's hall, and he listened to Othel Yarwick tell him that if they did not shore the east arch, it would spill its stones into the yard, and kill whatever fool was under it, not because it hated him, but because that was what stones into the yard, and kill whatever fool was under it. He listened to Aemon breathe, and felt the old man's fingers find his ones, and hold them for a moment, like a father's across a fire. He listened to Tormund laugh at a joke that would have been crude in summer and in winter, sounded like a prayer, because it was about eating things men had no business eating. He listened, and he did the work in front of him. And sometimes he looked up and saw through the work to the future, and it frightened him. So he looked down again. He never learned exactly how he came to be seated at a table one evening with a map before him, and a bone marker set with a black stone, and a woman with a red gem at her throat leaned over the map and put the marker down on Winterfell and said, "There, the satisfaction that said she had known all along that the game would come back to this board and this square." He only knew that when she did, the cold in the rookery behind his ribs moved, and he saw it, the courtyards under snow, the towers hunched like men with their cloaks drawn tight, the bales of hay disguised as hillocks, the breaths of horses streaming like prayer smoke, the candles and hand warmers and flints, and little pathetic comforts men carry against what will not be comforted. He saw a singer walk under the gate, with 4 washerwomen behind him, and a song like a blade on his tongue. He saw a girl with dark hair. He saw a woman with a hard mouth softened. He saw a boy with eyes like a wolf stand very still. "Winterfell," Melisandre said, as if he had argued, as if he would have argued. "Where the dead will dance, or we will." "Or both," Davos said in the doorway. Because the sea had taught him that 2 true things could be true at once, even if men spat at one of them. "Or both," Jon said, and put his finger where the red woman had set the marker, and thought of a letter that had been a plank and had become over months, a bridge that men forgot they trod upon until they looked down and saw water. "Boy," Melisandre said softly, as if to remind him what he was, and to rob him of it in the same breath. "Azor Ahai will be made at a wall or broken there." "Not under this one," Jon said, and she laughed again, and left him there with the ripe warm stink of the tense brazier, and the old cool stink of the map, and the taste in his mouth of iron and smoke, and something like roses. He rose before dawn to find the sky clear enough to show him a long, thin moon. He went to the outer yard and found Tormund already there with 4 boys and 2 girls who had eyes like their fathers and hair like their mothers and faces like wolves. He set them in a row and looked at them and thought of the God's Wood at Winterfell, and of a heart tree with eyes he had imagined he could read. Then he took them inside and gave them porridge with sugar when he could find it, and put a stick in each of their hands and said, "The first law of a stick is to hold on to it." They listened. He made them practice. He looked out the arrow slit when he could, and watched the east where the sea was, and the west where the forests were, and the south where the world was every bad story waiting to be told again. When the ravens left that day, they carried letters to men who believed in their own names, and men who believed only in warmth, and to a fat lord who believed in both, but put breath to neither, and to a king who believed in law, and a red witch who believed in fire, and an onion knight who believed in men. Knight who believed in men. They carried one letter written in a hand that shook a little because its writer had not slept, and did not plan to. It said in its first line the same thing as the last: "We will not burn beneath the wall. We will not bow. We will judge our own. We will recognize for peace what must be recognized, and deny for pride what must be denied. We will take you in if you come orderly, and we will put a shaft through your eye if you come with a knife." It was a simple letter. It was the letter Maester Aemon had taught him to write when he was a boy without knowing he had taught him. He sealed it with black wax, and sent it with the bird whose feet had been warmed in his palm. In the night, he woke to the sound of the wall speaking very softly to itself, as if reciting the names of all the winters it had known. Ghost was asleep with his head on Jon's boots. The direwolf's breath rose and fell like a bellows. Somewhere, a woman was singing to herself a song without words. Somewhere, far, a man caught in ice lifted his last breath, and made of it a small cloud that froze as it left his lips, and fell in a tinkling like thin glass. Somewhere nearer, a boy whose father had put a knife into his hand for the first time that day, and kissed his cheek for the first time that week, turned in his sleep and whispered a word that sounded like home. He rose. He went to the parapet because he could not. The night was a velvet scraped thin. The stars were close enough to steal if you were a boy and had a long enough stick. He stood with his hands on the rime, and the cold bit him as always, and his body had learned to be grateful. He took it in. He let it go. He thought of knives disguised as songs and songs disguised as knives. He thought of ladders and law, and a girl in gray whose roses no one would see beneath her furs. At his back, the footsteps were the quiet ones he had come to know. the way a man comes to know one bird's wing from another. You will have your letter, Melisandre said, though he had not asked. And you will have your bridge, and still you will fall. It is the way of bridges. I have fallen before, Jon said. I know how to climb. Not this fall, she said. This is the one you do not climb from with the same bones. She turned her face toward him, and for a moment, the red of her stones was only the red of her flesh. You have a part to play, so everyone has told me, Jon said. It will be a relief when someone tells me I can put my feet up. She laughed softly, and the sound went up into the hard thin stars and joined them and made a new one. Play it. She said, and was gone. And he stood there with the walls cold in his hands, and thought of boys with sticks and king's letters, and the smell of roses that would not go away, and a fish-faced thing walking up a cliff path. To see who watched it, the knight pressed his eyes. He let them close and did not fall. He did not fall because other men were standing below him with hands on doors and feet on floors and breath making warmth for those near enough to take it, and because sometimes that is all that keeps a man on his feet, the heat of other men going about their small necessary lives, and the knowledge that if he falls, he will disturb them and they will have to move, and the knight will notice. In the morning, there was work. There was always work. A sled had broken an axle, and a boy had broken a finger, and a man had broken his pride. The axle could be mended, and the finger could be set, and the pride could be left alone to find itself again. There were onions to be counted, and a sour barrel of pickled cabbage to be rolled outside, and buried where it could do no further harm. There was a letter from Denys Mallister, with a neat list of the men he had lost, and the men he had gained, and a note at the bottom that said, "The wind was a woman last night, and she whispered to me like one," and Jon smiled, and then did not, because he sometimes felt the same. There was a rope to be replaced on the east hoist, and a patch of ice to be shaved where a man had slipped 3 days running, because he refused to learn. There was a decision to be made about whether to send another boat to Hardhome, and he made it, and hated it, and made it again when Bowen Marsh came to him with numbers in his palm like pebbles in a child's game. There was an hour in the middle of the day when the sun came through a thin high slit of cloud, and turned the yard into something like a lovely lie, and he stood still, and took it into his bones, and then went back inside. At twilight, a raven came with a message tied very neatly to its leg in a hand he did not know. The seal had been pressed with something small and sharp that left a design like a wind-blown tree. The words were spare and cold as a hill's shadow. "We have your girl," it said. "We have your singer. If you would have them again, you must send us a song. Send it on a blade. Send it quickly. The snow grows." Jon read it, and then read it again, and then set it down and put his hand flat upon it, as if to keep it from flying away. He felt the wall behind him, and the wall in front of him, and the wall under him, and the wall in his hand. He had built a bridge. It would hold. It would break. He would stand upon it either way, and do the work he could. He took up a quill. He warmed its tip. He began to write what came after the first letter. He wrote slowly and carefully, with a care that made each word into a plank. He wrote until the ink froze, and then warmed it, and wrote again. The ravens waited, heads tucked, clever little eyes like beads. Ghost slept with the tip of his tail twitching. Snow fell. Men breathed and cursed and laughed and slept and woke and did the work. The world moved, slowly and with sincerity. The wall spoke. Jon listened, and in the spaces between its old words he set his own. He set them like stones. He stood upon them. He waited for the weight. He was not yet crushed. He was, for the moment, enough. Okay. Jon did not send an answer that night. He let the words lie like iron cooling, and went up to the parapet, and walked the length of the west wall walk, while the wind read the letter in his hand, and found nothing there it liked. Ghost paced him, head low, ears flicking to take the measure of each new sound. Below, the yard showed its islands of fire and the dark shoals between. Beyond the palisade the King's Hill stood empty, trampled clean by men who had left it for the snow to claim. The stars were a salt spill. He felt very small under them. He had always felt small under them. He had been taught to. When he came down at last, Maester Aemon was awake with a cup between his hands that let out the ghost of steam. "You are learning to give the night its due," the old man said, as if he were praising a boy for the first time he had not cried at a sword cut. "The letter," Jon said, and put it into Aemon's lap. The old man's fingers found it at once. He had always found what men put in reach of him. He listened while Jon read. He did not speak when Jon had done. He set his thumb on the crack in the wax, as if he could feel the shape of the sender's face in it. "Not a boy's hand," he said at last. "A hand that likes its own work." "I can write a dozen answers," Jon said. "None of them are good." "Write the one that costs least and buys most," Aemon said gently. "And be ready for the price to be higher when the seller sees you coming." He slept then, by inches, and woke as if the dawn had been poured over him. The day was all iron edges. It brought him the same tasks in new clothes. He gave Janos Slynt the command of Greyguard because Greyguard was falling down and needed a man with a loud voice to shout it back into shape, and because sometimes a man you did not like was good for the one thing you did not like to do. Slynt's eyes bulged. They always did. "You forget yourself, Lord Snow," he said. "I am no mason's foreman. I will sit in the cold and count broken stones while you sit by the king's fire and hold his hand? No. It is not a request," Jon said. "I said no." Slynt's mouth worked like a man wrestling a fishbone. "You think you are a lord because boys cheered your name in a yard? I know what you are. You forget who I have dined with. I will not go to that ruin at the end of the world to please your pride." Jon stood very still. He had learned as a boy how hard it was to push over a still thing. The hall's murmur went quiet like snow falling. "You will go to Greyguard," he said, "or you will go to the cells." "I will go to neither," Slynt said, and smiled because he thought he had found the space between the two where he might stand and live forever. "I will go to bed, and tomorrow I will have forgotten this saucy folly, and you will have as well." He did not. Neither did Jon. The next dawn Jon had him out in the yard with a block set near the old gallows, and the men standing in a wide ring, boots creaking on snow, breath lifting as one breath, and then as many. Ghost sat at Jon's side like a white promise. "Janos Slynt," Jon said when the man would not kneel. "You refused a lawful order from your commander. You called your commander boy and worse. You set your pride against the work. That is the law. This is the cost." Slynt wept then, and wept snot, and begged loudly, and promised and glared, and promised again. He said he had only been jesting. He reached for any shelf that would hold him, and found none. Jon heard Bowen Marsh breathing beside him in quick little rapid puffs, and heard Othel Yarwick at the back of the ring mutter something under his wind that might have been a prayer and might have been a curse. He did not hear himself. He did not feel the long black leather of the glove in his palm, only the cold at his fingertips and the weight on his hip. He heard Ed, very far away, say, "Best make it clean," to no one at all. It was. Longclaw did what steel will do when a man has cleaned and oiled it, and asked it to be honest. The head thumped. Steam came up from the cut like a word. Jon set the sword down and wiped it clean, and knew that some part of the men watching had been waiting to see if he would hesitate on the second wipe, and that now that unkind little part was satisfied. He could smell bile. He could smell roses. He did not know from where. Bowen Marsh came to him later with his mouth pursed small, and his eyes red, and said, "That was not the only way. It was the law," Jon said. Marsh looked like a man who had put his hand into a bag and drawn out the one stone he had hoped to avoid. "You are too young for this," he said, and then swallowed because the words had left his mouth naked. "Forgive me. I was a boy yesterday," Jon said. "Today, I am whatever the watch needs." "And tomorrow?" Marsh said. "Tomorrow I will need more bread than today," Jon said. And Marsh could not help the bark of mirth that came up from some honest place in him. He went away with his beard wet. The yard was quieter after that. For a time men looked at the place where the snow had been kicked up and then trod it flat without meaning to, the way men do when they walk past a grave. John went on with the day. He sent 2 carts to the western villages and a black brother with a list of names to the crofts in the new gift. He sat with the girl in gray and the Magnar, and watched them learn the first clumsy steps of speaking to one another like a married pair. The ayes that meant, I hear, the no that meant, not yet, the silence that meant stop. He sent men to the cellars and the piers and the crane. He gave Ghost the old wolfskin he liked, and listened to the dire wolf tear into it and pretend it was an enemy. It was easier to sleep that night and harder. The sword stroke returned as such strokes will, honest as a hand closing around a cup. But when he woke sweating, there was a steady place in him that had not been there before. It did not make him proud. Pride was for boys and kings. It made him able. Cotter Pike's next letter was shorter still. It had only the one word again, and this time John did not put it in the rack. He lit a taper and set it to the corner and watched it take and curl and go black, and then nothing. You do not want to put that into any man's mouth, Ed observed, seeing him at it. Else he will taste it all his days. You have some wisdom, John said. I hide it, Ed said. I find it gets me into rooms I do not want to be in. Melisandre came to him with a look in her eyes that was almost kindness. You are learning to cut, she said. I knew how, John said. You did not know how to cut your own shape from the block. She said. Men seldom do. It is a trick gods teach or winters teach. Seldom fathers. I had a good father, John said, and that was all. Good men are cruel in their turn, she said. All men are. The trick is to know to whom. She drifted nearer. He could feel the warmth of her, which made the cold creep in the bones feel further away, but only for the moment. The girl comes nearer, she said. The hound with the broken head howls. I see it in the flames. Then be ready with broth, John said. And bandages. On the day you jest with me, she said. The world is not what it was. She turned to go, then turned back. Beware the knives you do not see, she added. It is always the knives you do not see. I have seen too many not to expect more, John said. And she went, and he was left with the words as if someone had put a small hot pebble into his glove. When the storm came, it came like a man who had finally made up his mind to do the thing he had been threatening to do since late summer. The sky turned to one unmoving color, and then the color moved, and men lost their hats, and their tempers, and their way. The wall's voice deepened. The old ice groaned as if remembering a name it had tried to forget. John set triple watches, and had torches laid along the parapet, at intervals so regular Othel Yarwick muttered about the extravagance, and then did it anyway because his hands liked the symmetry. The Queen's men huddled in their tent city around their red bowls, like people sitting around a story, and Melisandre stood under the curtain of falling white, and looked up and smiled, as if the storm were a lover shy on doorsteps. The first day the mummers played, and men blessed them for it, and ate their supper, listening to a song about a man who had thought to steal a jeweled hen from a sept, and found himself chased by priests with brooms, and laughed because the brooms were ridiculous, and because the hen made a clucking noise in the piper's hands that was lewd in a way no one could explain. The second day they played less and men laughed less and fought more. The third day they did not play because the piper had cracked the corner of his lip, and the lutist had a finger that would not bend. They warmed their hands like the rest, and told each other jokes that would not be new in any age, and were still needed in all of them. Shireen Baratheon came out in a fur so big it made her look like a small lean fox inside a bear. Her face showed the gray hard map of the thing that had tried to claim her when she was a baby. And her mouth had the thin set of dignity that belonged to someone who had learned to be looked at. Are you the Lord Commander? She asked John very politely, as if asking him if he were the baker. I am, John said. Are you the Queen's daughter? I am, she said. She looked very solemn, and then very much like a child. My father says we are going to be a family in the north. He says that when you are king, all families are your family. Do you think that is true? I think the north is a hard place to be a family, John said. And she considered that, and nodded. Patchface says you should wear bells on your boots so the dead will hear you and stay out from underfoot, she said. Will you? No, John said more gently than the word looked. I did not think you would, she said. He says lots of things. She leaned nearer and whispered, as if the snow had ears. He says the sea is full of white fish with fingers, and we will eat them when the world ends. Patchface says a lot of things, Dolorous Ed said from behind Joan's elbow, in the tone of a man agreeing with a priest to end a sermon faster. None of them have ever made my soup saltier. Shireen smiled, and then remembered she was a princess, and set her mouth straight again. If I draw you a castle, will you hang it where everyone can see it? She asked John. Yes, he said. But I will not pretend it looks like that. It will look like how it feels, she said in the old, precise way of children and maesters. Good day, Lord Commander. She went away with her massive fur looking as if it were walking a small girl. After 3 days of wind, the storm found its second strength, and the sea began to send its breath up the coast, bellies of cloud turning and grumbling. Eastwatch's towers went hazy in the far northeast, and the ravens that reached them reached later. Cotter Pike's marks when they came looked as if a man had written with a finger dipped in soot on the back of a very nervous bird. Dead in the surf. Dead in the path. Dead at the fire. Dead, dead. He repeated it until the word became a rhythm without meaning, and then wrote men's names again and lost them under blots. John sent a rider to the Shadow Tower and another to the Bridge of Skulls, though Denny's Malister would not be able to ride over that broken place if the wind carried him like a scarf. He sent Tormund's son to find him and bring him to the Shield Hall, and they stood together under the grinning shields, and talked of long boats and short winters, and the way fear makes men forget everything but their own name. The big free folk leader thumped the table and thumped it again. I will take 500, he said. Give me 500, and I will go up the coast on foot and come in above that bad rock and pull them down by their ears. You will take 50, John said. And men with hands that know how to build a sled while they're walking. You will not go within a mile of the cliff without rope. You will not go without girls who can make milk. You will not go without a dozen men who have sailed those waters in summer. 50, Tormund snorted. You hoard your men like a maiden her kisses. I hoard them like a man hoards breath when the sky turns black, John said, and something in his voice made Tormund look at him sideways, and then grin, because he liked to be convinced by a weight he had not expected. 50 then, he said. And if any of them turn back, I will marry their mother and be their father, so I can beat them properly. You are already father to half the camp, John told him. Beat them for me while you are at it. They set a day to leave that was more a hope than a mark. It would be when the wind moved into a different part of the sky, and the men could carry their cords without the snow sawing them from their fingers. It would be when the sea's growl dropped to a mutter. It would be when the direwolf walked the yard 3 times each hour without stopping in the middle to sniff the wind and lay his ears flat. The direwolf is more a weathercock than any vain, Dolorous Ed had said. When he goes left, we all go left, and when he goes right, we hope the gods do too. John felt foolish listening to Ghost, more than he listened to the sun. He listened anyway. The little laws kept men from spinning into madness as surely as ropes kept sledges from going into the ravine one by one. John heard disputes and declared nothing and everything. He took 3 knives from men who had been too quick to draw them and gave them back, 2, and kept the 3rd until spring. He set a boy to mucking the cow buyer with a man who had struck him for laughing, and watched both come back less fond of themselves. He set a woman of the free folk to mind the queen's men's mules because she spoke to animals like a witch, and he wanted the queen's men to see a northern witch keep their beasts alive in weather their god did not like. He saw Melisandre's lips thin at that, and pretended he had not. He dreamed of Winterfell again. The gods would, and the pool with its stubborn skin. But this time, the leaves were glass, and when they fell to the water, they rang like small hurried bells, and he could not tell whether that was prayer or warning. He woke with Ghost pressing him like weight against drifting, and lay still until his breathing learned the cold again. On the 5th day, after Slint's head darkened the snow, a raven came bearing a white scrap tied with pink ribbon. The scrap was nothing. A sleeve cuff. A lady's cast-off. It had the stink of perfume that had gone stale in the cold, and a smear of something that might have been paint, and might have been blood. The hand that wrote was a hard, cramped, clever hand that liked to cut as much as it liked to write. It made of each letter a little knife standing up on the page. "You think yourself law at the wall," it began without grace. "You think your ice makes you a king in everything but name. I have your girl. I have your singer. I have the skins of your friends and your false king's ladders, and the bones of half the men who thought him more than a cold sneeze." It went on. It listed names as if they were numbers owed. It demanded as if the paper could lift its own fist. It called men dogs and asked for bones. It called John boy and told him to come south with his pretty wolf on a chain and learn what men did to boys in the snow. "Send me what is mine or I will take it," it ended. "Send it on a blade. That is the only song I will sing. No seal." A little flourish at the bottom like a man cocking his head to see if you would flinch. John set it on the table and put a cup on one corner and his knife on the other and his hand on top of both and stood looking at it as if the words might go pale if he stared hard enough. Bowen Marsh read it and his face folded into a shape John had never seen on him. Something like fatigue, and something like "Dear Gods no," and something like "I told you," and he said none of it aloud. Althil Yarwick read it and breathed once through his nose, and then again, then turned his head to cough carefully and softly into his sleeve, a craftsman's courtesy. Septon Shellador wept the way he wept at the end of songs, and dabbed his eyes with a grimy square of linen, and said, "We must pray." And someone further down the table said, very dryly, "We have been," and the Septon drooped. Tormund took it between two fingers like a man pinching up a poop, and squinted. "Very handsome," he said, and grinned. "Writes like a Southron, that one. I would like to split his face. Then show." "You will not go south," John said. "Not for you," Tormund said cheerfully. "For myself. Men have to carry their own wolves sometimes." "No," John said again, "because if he left now, John would be holding a rope with no one at the other end. If anyone goes south, it will not be you." Melisandre had come in without the sound of her feet announcing her. She watched him, and in her eyes something moved like light under the skin of a coal. "Do you taste the rose?" she asked. "I taste," Tormund said. "The Southerners always smear scent on it and tell you it is cake. It is still shit." "The letter is a lure," Bowen Marsh said, finding his voice. A good, reliable voice that liked rules. "It is meant to pull us down from our place. We must not go to it. We must not even lean toward it." "We will answer it," John said. "Do you mean to answer with a march?" Marsh asked, and now the word had a fright at the back of it like a hare glimpsing open ground, and not trusting it. John did not answer at once. He had learned not to. He let the room breathe. He heard the wind hum along a shutter hinge. He heard Ghost shift and set claws softly. He heard the cup edge tick against the wood as the hearth's heave made the table warp. "No," he said. "Not for this. If what this man wants is to pull us down into his snow and make us run until his dogs find us, I will not give him the pleasure. He wants my temper. He shall not have it. He wants my fear. He has enough of his own. He wants me to forget what winter asks. I will remember." He sent his answer with a raven whose left foot dragged a little. He wrote it, as Aemon had taught him, plain, and with each sentence as tight as a bowstring. He wrote that the Night's Watch stood neutral between kings and would hold that ground until the world ended. For that was their vow and the wall under it. He wrote that guest right held under their roof and the law of the yard with it. He wrote that the watch would judge its own and no others. He wrote that burnings would not be suffered in their precincts, and that the next Queen's man who dragged a stake across their yard would find himself warming his hands in a snowbank, because even a god deserved a laugh. He wrote that if the man who sent the letter came north in arms, the watch would put shafts into his men's eyes, because that was the part of neutrality that men liked to forget. And then he wrote very politely, "You may keep your singer. We have more songs than men, and when we need more men, we will find them somewhere you are not." The last line he did not show to Aemon. It was the one he liked best. The answer did not go alone. He sent 2 ravens more to the Shadow Tower and Eastwatch with copies of the pink ribbon letter and his reply, and 1 to Stannis' moving court wherever it had anchored that day, and 1 to White Harbor with a line to Davos that said, "The fat man will have a jest ready when he sees this thing. It is an ugly jest. Laugh first." He sent 3 more to the small holders he had begun to lean upon. The woman with her goats who had lost 3 sons to the snows, and still had to be told to keep the goats away from the young orchard. The smith at Queen's Crown, who could barely read but had a boy who could. The man who had once been a poacher and now collected wood taxes with a courtesy Jon admired. The North was a slow animal to rouse and a quick one to bite. He had learned its teeth. He did not need it to love him. He needed it to remember that the Wall and the Watch did not forget whose bread they had eaten all these years. He wrote, "Be ready to bar your doors if men in skins come asking questions and writing down answers in their heads instead of on paper. Be ready to tie your dogs tight and know where your women sleep. Be ready to send me names of men with warm barns and too much pride, because men like that carry news like coals in their sleeves and think themselves clever for not being burned." He signed each in a hand the boy at Queen's Crown would know and set the wax. The day drifted into the next like snow blown from one drift into another. He ate porridge that tasted of smoke and onions that tasted of salt and bread that tasted like bread, because it had been kneaded by a woman who had kneaded 1,000 loaves, and would do 1,000 more before her fingers stiffened. He slept curled like a question mark with his boots on. He woke from a dream of the crypts where the kings of winter sat thinking long thoughts, and was angry he had woken before he had been able to ask any of them what those thoughts were. He put men at the gate who had not been there the week before. He watched the men he had put at the gate. He sent word to the wildling camps to stay where they had been told, and not try to hunt in the forbidden groves, and the wildlings obeyed like cats, which is to say not at all, and then all at once. In the middle of it all, a boy ran like boys only run in the snow when the thing they carry will keep their feet warm if they get it delivered, and thrust Jon a parchment, and then bent at the waist to breathe while Jon broke the seal. The seal was a stag. The hand was Davos. Steady, a seaman's, with the same unyielding angles as the man himself. He had written it on a planked table in a place that had moved under him. Jon would have sworn to it. "Deep wood holds," it said, among other things. "Your ladders served, your law served. Lord Glover is a man again." Then, lower down, a line that was not Davos. It was Stannis, and it had been added later, squeezed in with the narrowness of a man who did not waste parchment any more than he wasted men. "We move toward Winterfell," the king's hand said. "Let your letter hold behind me." He took it up to Maester Aemon, though the old man had been sleeping, and watched his lips move as he had the words spoken into his ear. "The world always runs toward itself," Aemon murmured when the last word had been put into his ear. "The cold runs toward the fire. The sword runs toward the neck. Men run toward Winterfell because that is where they run from." He smiled the small smile that had always made Jon want to sit nearer. "You will have more letters soon." He did. One was from White Harbor, in a hand round as the man it represented, full of jokes that had knives in them, a basket of sugared chestnuts with a razor under. Wyman Manderley's wit had put on its second face again. "We have fish," it said. "We have flour. We have pepper enough to make poor meat proud. The phrase have sons enough to make poor soup rich if you put in a bone. We have songs." A line at the bottom said, "Tell your singer to keep his throat warm. Winter chills." Jon read it aloud to Davos by the brazier in Stannis' empty tent, and the Onion Knight's mouth pinched the way a man's does when he has tasted a too true thing. "He knows," Davos said softly. "He says nothing. He knows." The Mallister's neat hand, brought other news. The little holders at the foot of the Shadow Tower's stair had seen blue lights on the ridge again. The East men wrote, "Gulls dying by the dozen on the pier, and washing in with eyes pecked soft." The men settled in the new gift sent. An upturned cart found in the woods with fox prints all around it, and a scarf caught in the trees that had been almost blue once, and now made a narrow pale stripe against the snow. None carried the weight of the letter with the pink ribbon. All together they made of the days a thing with a bruise in it. At night, the Queen's men sang, and sometimes the song was quiet enough to be bearable, and sometimes it made John want to throw them off the wall like black birds flung into the air to find their own way. Celisa sat at table like a blade, and looked with contempt at anyone who ate, as if hunger were unseemly. Shireen ate with her, and looked at the poor in the hall with the straightforward stare of a girl who did not know yet that she would be punished for seeing. Patchface sang and clapped, and said to John in the yard one morning, "Under the sea the birds have hands, and they clap when the ships go by." John had said, "Do they?" And Patchface had beamed as if John had passed a test, the full set for all men, and only liked some of the answers. Melisandre's fires turned their bowls to mirrors, and then to mouths. She watched them with the patience of water-wearing stone. One night she came to John and said, "I saw a man who was not a man walk up the side of a cliff, and sit there and look at the sea as if he wanted it for himself. And then I saw him stand and go into the snow on legs that did not leave prints." "You see a lot of things," John said. "And you hear a lot," she said, and left him with that, as if she had put a cloak on him and he had to choose whether to shrug into it. He did not shrug into it. He drew his own cloak tighter and went to the stables, and stood there with the warm sweet stink in his nose, and felt his heart slow. He had always liked horses better than most men liked him. A roan mare with a small mouth nuzzled his glove for salt, and he let her, and smiled because the simple things still worked. The morning Tormund left with 50, and a few more just because men always find a way to add their names to lists when lists are being made. John stood in the gate passage with Ghost at his side, and watched them go out, heads down, ropes coiled, faces set. "Bring them down," John said. "I will bring them down, or I will come down with them," Tormund said. "And if I do neither, I will drink with them on the cliff until my piss freezes to the rock, and we will use it as a rope." He clapped John's shoulder so hard John's teeth clicked, and then he went, a big man smaller at once in the falling white. When the east wind turned and the snow came sideways, a smell came with it that John had not known he knew until he smelled it again. Wet fur and warm iron and fear. It came and went, as if the wind were teasing. The men on the parapets drew their cloaks up and looked at one another, and did not say, "Others," because men had learned not to name some things lest the naming serve as welcome. John did not say it either. He said, "Pour oil on the gates, and scrape the ice from the hinges, and set double guard." And the men did it with relief, because actions are blankets under which fear sleeps more soundly. A rider came from the south with horse and eyes rhymed alike. He insisted on seeing John and begged a fire, and would not thaw his hands until he had said his piece. Men hung from the walls of Winterfell. Women in the kitchens cutting flax because the larders were low, and the men liked to chew something when they spun their lies. A singer with freckles had been seen in the yard teaching a song to the washerwomen. A song about a king who went under the hill, and came out with a crown in his hand that was not his. Snow so deep that men stepped down into it, and did not step back up. The rider said that, and then let his hands thaw, and howled like a dog, and John sent him to the beer, and the bed he had earned. The next day, the letter came with the tree pressed into the seal again, and it did not ask this time. It commanded. It said Stannis was dead and hung and eaten by crows. It said the spearwives with the singer were dead. It said the king's banners had been taken and used to wipe men's arses. It said Shaggy Dog had been roasted and fed to Freys. It said the north was the Dreadfort's dog yard, and the dog would be fed. It said bring the girl and the singer and the wife-beater and the brothers of the wall who had stolen Winterfell's lady, and bring your pretty sword and bend it so I can wear it as a necklace. It said, in a flourish at the bottom, I will come for you anyway. The letters were like teeth. John took that one up to the platform above the shield hall doors and read it aloud, because sometimes the only way to keep words from eating you is to put them into other men's mouths and make them chew with you. The brothers listened as men listen to a storm behind a door, with attention and the assurance that the door is between. Queen's men listened with small smiles, because suffering being named was a thing they tasted like warm wine. Free folk listened with their hands open and empty at their sides, the way men stand when they want to take hold of something and are waiting to be told it is theirs. When John had finished, the silence was like a well. He felt the whole weight of the wall behind him, and the winter before him, and the horrible smallness of a piece of ribbon in his hand. He spoke then. He spoke of Hardhome first, because he had learned it was easier to ask men to stand against knives in their own bellies, if he had already set one there himself. He told them of the dead in the surf, and the smoke off the cliff and the gulls with soft eyes. He told them of a road that had no road under it, only water that would take a man one step beyond his plan. He told them Tormund had gone with 50 and a laugh, because sometimes men go with laughter when they are afraid of what fear will make them do. He told them they would bring them down, and if they did not, they would go again and again, because that was what their vow meant. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes everything. Always trying. He told them of Alice Karstark and the Magnar, and why a marriage made under the wall was not a toy for queens to break, or for lords to toss across tables like dice. He told them why they had cut off a man's head even when his head had begged to be allowed to learn. He told them how a head like that could not learn what it would not kneel to. He told them there were little boys eating porridge in his hall whose fathers had sworn their names to him, and if one of those boys cried out in hunger in the night, it would be in the Lord Commander's ear first that the sound would land. Then he told them of the letter, and what a letter could be. More than paper, less than law. A way for a man to put his hand in your coat and find your heart with his fingers. He told them what the letter had asked for, and what it had implied, and what it had smirked at. He told them that under the wall they had made a small law that had held a larger one at bay, and that he would not give that up to a man whose seal smelled of rot and pride. He told them he would not march south. He told them if any man wanted to march south, because he preferred that snow to this one, he would give him a cloak and a skin of ale and wish him luck. He told them what he would do. He would send 10 men to go down the King's Road as far as the White Knife and listen with their eyes. He would send letters to the small men with big barns as he had done, and to the big men with small barns too. And he would tell them to lie flat when the wind put its hands on them. And he would tell them the watch stood between them and dogs who had learned to eat men, as the watch had always stood. He would not send a raven to the man who had written the letter. He would send his silence down the King's Road instead. He has more voices than I do, John said. Let him talk to himself. By the time he was done, some men had stopped looking at him and were looking at one another, which is more dangerous, and some had begun to look at the floor, which is worse. Bowen Marsh had the helpless air of a man who felt the boat creak and the wave under it, and could not find any oar he knew how to use. Othel Yarwick was as he often was, in the face of much speaking, full of a practical itch to go fix something with an axe and a handful of wooden pegs. Dolorous Ed looked sadder, which John had not known possible. When he left the platform, a woman brushed against him, not by accident. Her hair smelled of smoke and snow, and the cedar chests where women put their better clothes. My lord, she said under her breath. The man with the letter wrote it, because the singer took the girl, and he cannot bear to write that down. Her eyes were very large and very calm. She is on the snow with a boy whose face looks like a drowned man. He turned and looked down at her. How do you know this? I was a washerwoman once, she said. We know who comes and goes. We know whose shirts are cut for shoulders and whose for backs bent under sticks. We know what songs men know when they should not. She slid away into press of bodies before he could answer. As easily as a fish will go from shadow to deeper shadow. That night, he dreamed of Abel's song. It had no words his mouth could keep, only a shape, like water turning under ice where the river goes, even when men think it sleeps. He woke with his hand on his sword, and the taste of the song in his mouth like frozen apples. Ghost was sitting with his gaze fixed on the door. "I know," John said softly. "I will hear it when it comes. It came first as rumor, then as a man, then as truth." The rumor said a girl with a raw throat and a boy with a broken name had been pulled out of the snow by men with dead crows on their shoulders and dead men in their mouths. Men who said, "Your Grace," to a king who had made a throne of a snowdrift. The man who brought the rumor wore manderly green in a fashion that would have been proud if he were not so tired. The truth was a girl in furs who had once known satin and furred words, and who now knew only how to drink hot broth without burning her skin. The truth was a boy who looked like fear had sat on his chest and fallen asleep there and left its shape. The truth was Theon Greyjoy, and the girl was not Arya Stark. He sat with them where the heat would not feel like a hand on a bruise, and he listened while the boy's voice went up and down like a badly tuned lute, and the girl's voice did not go at all where it tried to. He listened while the stories tumbled out of their mouths like dice no one could stop rolling. He sorted them with the patience of a man picking bristles from a hog's hide. He set aside the parts that belonged to Theon's shame, because there was too much of that, and the pot would boil over and scald them all if he let it bubble. He set aside the parts that belonged to the girl's dread, because dread makes lies of honest memory. He kept the parts that matched the woman's whisper, and the writer's news, and the letters, and the smell that had come on the wind, and the old understanding of Winterfell that had never left him even when he had left it. He believed them. He took the girl's hand between both of his and warmed it, and said, "It was not you." And she looked at him and began to weep with her mouth closed, until the tears ran into it, and she had to open it to breathe. He put his hand on Theon's shoulder, and Theon flinched, and then did not. "The dog," Theon whispered. "He will come. He hunts. Let him," Jon said in a voice that surprised him by how little it wanted to be anything else. "If he comes, he will not go home again." He sent the girl with Shireen's maids because he trusted the maids more than he trusted most men, and because Shireen could look at a scar and not look away. He put Theon in a cell where the straw was clean and the door was thick, and the guards would not speak to him because men had spoken to Theon too much or not enough, and neither had saved him. He sent a raven to Stannis to say that a girl had come from Winterfell with a name that was not hers, and the man who had once been Eddard Stark's ward had brought her. And if Stannis had a use for the head of a dog, the watch would fetch it and send it south with the next cart. Then he sat over his maps and the simple habit of breathing for a long time. The next day he called Tormund's son back from the gate where the boy had been watching the snow fall. "Your father will need men when he comes back," Jon said. "He will need men now," the boy said bluntly. "He will have men," Jon said, and left unsaid which men, because the watch was long on sharp ears these days. "We will send to the village on the long lake and to the crofters who hides his sacks under the floor. Put me down 10 names for each place, and write the reasons they will come when I call. We will send just before dawn." "You are not king," the boy said. "I am the wall," Jon said, and the boy shut his mouth like a trap going off and went to fetch his slate. Melisandre came to him while he was writing by candlelight with his fingers stiff. "You will die," she said calmly, as if she were telling him that a kettle had boiled and ought to be taken off the fire. "It will be knives. They will be in the dark. They will be close. You will be surprised, and then you will not." "Everyone dies," Jon said without looking up. "You keep telling me things that are not news." "Everyone dies," she agreed. "Not everyone finds their way back." "I am not your Lord of Light's cat," Jon said, and only then looked up. "Do not play with me to watch me twitch. Do not stand with your back to doors," she said. "Do not go where men sing, and do not carry your own candles. Do not trust a man with his grief tied under his chin like a Sunday scarf. Do not bend to a boy who says he loves you. Do not look for your mother in any woman's hands." "Is that all?" Jon asked. "For now," she said, smiling. He slept in his clothes and woke in a cold room where the candle had burned out, and the morning was not yet willing to be called morning. He went down to the yard and found the snow had stopped. The air was so clear that when he climbed to the roof of the armory, he could see the dawn's faint red on the far edge of the world. as if a long knife had had a drop of blood left on the tip, and the light was finding it. The queen's men stood with their hands out to their braziers and sang in their soft, heat-hungry voices. He looked at them and thought of the letter and the way men wrote their fear and called it law. He looked at the tower doors and thought of knives in the dark. He thought of a boy with sticks and girls, with wolves' eyes and a woman with a gray face, who had smiled fiercely at him when he put the girl in her care and said, "I will keep her until the world is done." And he believed her, because Val did not waste words. He had not wanted Val. He had known he would need her. The day he sent the 10 men south, he sent them all in different clothes. One went in black as a brother ought. One went with a fox fur cap and an old cloak that had once been green and now was everything. One went in a quilted jerkin patched with too many pieces to count and a hat that had a dead crow in it. One went as a drover. One went as a man who had lost his mind and found a stick. It was theater. Men liked theater. He told them to go as far as the Green Apple Fort if they could, and to sit in the alehouse and listen to men who liked to tell lies about what they had seen. He told them to say little and keep good hearts and return quickly, or not at all if returning meant their news would be late. Bowen Marsh watched them file out with his hat pulled down. "You are sending the watch to spy for a king," he said. "Not quite an accusation. Not a prayer either. I am sending men to find out if the next letter will come with men behind it," John said. "If it does, would you like to be surprised, Bowen?" "I do not like it either way," Marsh said. "Surprise makes my feet slip. Knowing makes my belly hurt." "We will soon have both," John said. And Marsh made the face he made when laughter tried to get into it and could not find the door. Shireen brought him the drawing she had promised. It was a castle that had all the truth a child's hand could give. Towers too tall, windows too large, a gate that looked like a smile. She had written "Castle Black" along the bottom in letters she had learned from a man who had taught her to hold quills too carefully. It looked nothing like Castle Black, and entirely like it. He hung it where she asked. Even Bowen Marsh smiled, and then looked ashamed of it, as if smiles were mistakes in a ledger. The day the wind swung round and carried the sea's hush away, Tormund returned with men behind him who had gone out boys and come back old. They had faces lined by the hands of enemies no man saw until he felt them. The first thing he did was drink, and the second thing he did was weep. "We pulled them down," he said thickly into his bowl. "Not all. Never all. Enough to make us feel good and then bad about feeling good." They had a song up there, and it was a bad song, Crow. It made you want to stand still, and then it made you want to run, and the ground decided. "How many?" John asked. "Enough to say the word many and not be lying." Tormund said, "Enough to make me want a smaller world." He dragged his sleeve across his eyes. "We left a rope down. We tied it twice. You can tell your sea crow that." "I will," John said. "And I will get him men." He did not say from where. There were always men. They might not be the ones he liked. Queen Selisa sent for him to stand with her while she held court for her ladies, which was to say, she sent for him to watch her be cruel to women who could not fight back. He went because sometimes the only law a courtyard will see that day is the law in a man's eyes who does not have a crown. She chid them for hair and for hems, and for the number of stitches in a seam, and in between she watched John as if he were a candlestick, and she wished to see how the wax ran. "I am told you have a girl who is not a girl," she said eventually. "I am told you have the boy who made her so. In my husband's absence all such matters belong to me. In my wall's presence they do not," John said. "We made a letter. We set a seal. We live by it." She drew herself up until her chin made a sharp little warning to the room. "A letter. A seal. Do you think ink rules? Do you think wax commands? Do you think neutrality means a hearth to stone your sins under? Who gave you this place?" "Benda wand." "The wall," John said. "And men who died before you were born." "You are insolent," she said. "I keep my words straight," he said. "You may have the same if you like." She rose then and stared at him so long that her eyes surely must have ached. "My husband will find you useful, or he will find you not," she said. "I will pray that he does." She meant, "I will pray for you to be broken and made into a shape that fits my hand." He bowed because he was honest, and because he knew that a bow can be a man's bulwark as easily as a sword. She dismissed him with a flick of her finger like a woman dealing with ashes. In the yard after, Patchface sang to a knot of children. "When the snows fall and the white winds blow, it is time for men to grow, to grow, to grow." Then the children clapped and laughed because they liked the way grow felt against their teeth. John put his hand on Ghost's neck and told himself to keep his own teeth behind his lips. A rider came from the lakes at dusk with his hair like a thatch under the hood. He said the river had frozen hard enough to take a man's weight, and then, just as a man had put his weight on it, thought better of it, and took only his boot. He said men were arguing in the villages about whether to go to Winterfell because there was food there, and men who liked to put the flat of a spear against your back while you ate, or whether to stay where they were and carve the last turnip and die in the bed where their brothers had been born. He said there were fires at night that did not show smoke by day. He said, "My mother says this winter will not end." He said it over and over until John put a cup in his hands and told him, "Drink, and it will end while you drink, and then begin again when the cup is empty. That is how we do it." Theon dreamed in his cell. He did not cry out anymore the way he had the first nights when words came from him like things dislodged from his skin. But he moaned with his mouth closed, and the sound had the shape of prayer. John went and sat outside the door and listened with the feeling he had always had in the Godswood at Winterfell. That it did not matter if the gods heard you, only that you put your mouth in the right shape and let your breath go and made a sound that was honest. When the moaning stopped, John got up and went and did the next thing and the next after. He told himself he was not counting days. He was a liar. He counted them the way a man keeps track of the beats of an old wound. He knew when there had been 6 sunless days in a row, and when there had been 8, and how men's shoulders went down at 8. As if they were remembering, they could not hold up their own skins forever. He also knew when the sky had made a small attempt at blue, and when that small attempt had lifted every head in the yard like a trumpet. On a day when the light decided to try again, a boy came up the steps to the rookery with a little packet in his hand that he cradled as if it might break and hurt him. "From the crofter," he said. "The one with sacks in the floor." John opened it and found a sprig of pine and 3 nails, and a small piece of sugar, and a bit of yarn, and a pebble. He stared at them until he understood. The man was saying, "The wood stand we have mended. We have sweetness. We have thread. We have stones." It was more help than 6 letters. He sent back a pinch of salt, and 2 needles, and a sheaf of words, and felt for a moment the shape of an invisible rope running from Castle Black into the frost, down to a warm stick fire in a house, under the lee of a hill, and he felt less alone. He was only ever less alone for moments. That was how the winter taught men not to be greedy. The 3rd letter with the tree on the seal came with the same clever hand, and more of the same. It claimed victories John did not believe, and bodies John could not bear to count. It asked again for the singer and for the girl, as if asking 3 times were a charm or a curse. It said in a PS like a man leaning back to smirk through a door he had already closed, "Your king freezes on a lake, and the fish mock him with their bellies." John read it and put it aside and thought, if Stannis dies on a lake, he will have put on the lake's patience, and he will not die quickly. He had not been wrong often about men. He had been wrong sometimes, but not often. The mummers left for Eastwatch because their fingers had grown too stiff, and because winter is a bad audience. Men were kind to them for 2 days because men had liked them, and on the 3rd day, they were not kind because kindness takes work and work is for survival. One of the mummers looked back from the gate at the wall and made a face as if the thing had betrayed him by not being charmed. John gave them each a small purse from his own allowance and told them to use it to buy bread and lies. They left. Men watched them go the way they had watched Stannis go, as if part of them expected that the men would find a way to step up off the snow and keep walking into the sky. The next morning, dolorous Ed came to stand in Jean's door with his shoulders hunched against something no winter had made. "The Queen's men tried to light a brazier under the east arch," he said flatly. "I made them stop. 2 of them struck me. I did not strike them back because I am half a coward and half a brother. What would you like me to be the other half of?" "Alive," John said. "That was my thought as well," Eddie said. "If you want me to be more, I will need thicker gloves." John went with him to the arch and stood there with his breath making a little fog bank in front of him. The Queen's men stood with faces like leather and asked to light their god's breath where the wind would carry it nicely into the mouths of men who needed it. John said no, and said no, and said no again, and then said, "Light it outside the palisade." And they said, "That is what we asked, my lord." And he said, "You asked to light it under my arch where my law lies down to sleep." And they told him their God did not know what arches were, and he told them the law knew gods only by their noises. They went at last, with their brazier sulking and their song small. Melisandre watched from the yard with half a smile. "You will go on saying no until they grow tired," she said. "I will go on saying no until their fire goes out," John said. "Then you will have said no to all the fires," she said. "And what then?" "Then I will have the cold," John said. "I know how to use that." "You are growing," she said softly. "I'm sorry." He went back to his work. He had letters to write that men would not read, and letters to read he did not like. He had Boy to set to counting candles, and another to keep a tally of rope. He had 2 men to put in the ice cells because they had taken to settling disputes with fists and boots. And he had to tell the Queen's men they would not be permitted to watch, because men watching other men in cages is a hunger and feeds itself. He had a moment by the fire with Val and the girl who was not Arya, and he watched how the wildling woman combed the girl's hair as if it were a horse and mane tangled with burrs. Strong, gentle, without fuss, and he thought again that he had not wanted Val and had needed her. It was a week before the next bottom fell out of the world, which is to say a week by winter's new clock. Men had begun to grow used to the idea that each day might pass with nothing worse than frostbitten toes and a fight by the fire, and the world does not like men to be used to anything. The ravens went up and came back hungry. The watchmen on the east wall walked their walk and did not shout, but came down with faces like paper. The sea was not the sea. It was a field of white lumps where the waves had been, and gray channels where the ocean remembered itself. A thing walked there. It went as a man goes who knows he will not be denied, and the wind went around it instead of through it, and a little flock of gulls went up and turned and turned and turned and did not know what to do with their wings. John stood with his hands in his gloves and his heart in his teeth, and watched the thing go until it had gone out of sight, not because it had grown small, but because the world had decided not to show it to him any longer. "Do we write a letter to that?" Dolorous Ed asked after a time. "We put more oil on the hinges," John said. "We light more fires on the wall walk. We sharpen everything." "Bendero." "Sharpen what?" Ed asked in earnest. "Words," John said. "Stakes, knives, men." "Ah," Adid said. "My least favorite catalog." The days went on. A man found a pile of crow bones under a tree and brought them to John as if he were bringing him a kitten, and asked what to do. And John told him to bury them as if they were a man, because the crows had served the watch longer than any man had. And the man did, and Ed said, "You buried a crow with a ceremony?" And John said, "You buried a crow with a ceremony?" And John said, "Buried 4. And Ed made a face and went to set the thing in his lip. John did not sleep that night. He walked the yard until his feet knew every stone by memory. He thought of his sister who was not the girl in his care, and wondered if he would know her if she walked in through the gate, with her hair grown out, and her face new with hunger. He thought of Sansa at King's Landing, who had learned to smile while stepping aside. He thought of Bran and Rickon, gone into the woods like good seeds to cast themselves down in spring. And he hoped, which is a fool's work and work men must do because fools cannot be everywhere. He thought of Robb, and then he stopped thinking of Robb because there are some names you can only say with your eyes closed and your mouth shut. He went to the rookery and warmed his hands around the little brazier there, and felt himself grow for a moment, perversely fond of the stupid birds and their cleverness. A raven cocked its head and said, "Snow," twice, and then "no," and he laughed, and then he did not. The morning after that he woke to voices loud where quiet had been. Men were in the yard in a knot, with Queen's men standing at the edges like wallflowers too proud to seem to mind. The smell found him before the sight did, resin and fat and old meat. He pushed through and found the brazier lit under the east arch, and a prayer on Salice's lips, and 2 men already tied to a new erected stake. One wept. One stared straight ahead with his chin lifted and his eyes wet. The prayer had a hiss in it as it passed through the Queen's teeth. He felt the no rise in him like a sea. He spoke it. It did not stop anything. Salice's men had decided their stake had been set just outside the letter's law. They had put 1 foot under and 1 foot not, and stood with their arms folded, as if the trick made them clever. Melisandre watched with her red stones dark, no pulse in them. "No," Jon said again. "Not under my arch, not under our sky. You cannot own the sky." Salice said sharply, "You own a wall and have made a god of it. I own a king and a god and a cause. Gods do not bargain." "They do," Jon said. "People always bargain with their gods." He moved before he decided to move. He had never been a man who pushed. He pushed now. He took the rope in his hand and slashed it once and only once. The man who had been weeping fell to his knees, and then fell on his face because his legs had forgotten their work. The other flinched and stood very still, as if waiting to be spared could be done more successfully if one did not move. Salice cried out, and the Queen's men reached, and Ghost came like a white shout. The brazier went over in the scuffle, and sparks fled like children looking for corners. Men stamped them out. Men stamped out the ones near their boots first. "You will not," Jon said, and then realized he was not shouting, that he had said it as mildly as if he had been instructing a boy to hold a spoon correctly. "You will not hear. You will pay," Salice said in a voice that made you think of teeth. "I always do," Jon said. "You do too. Not here." They stared at one another with the white world all around, their words little fires that did not trouble it. Men withdrew with faces they must have owned at harvest time, old and pinched, and concentrating on the next necessary motion. The 2 men from the stake went into the ice cells. Melisandre smiled. Salice's mouth turned white. "You make enemies like a man who thinks he will not live long enough to have to answer to them," she said. "I make enemies like a man who will have to live with them," Jon said. "I have plenty." He went away because he had decided long ago that in any quarrel, someone must be the first to leave or no one would, and because his heart was making a noise like a drum that wanted hands. He was at the head of the stairs when the horn blew 3 times. The sound went through him like a loose step in a stair, the way it always had, only more. It was not a long blast. It was ragged and choked off, and had the sound in it of a man whose throat had been squeezed while he was trying to do his job. He should not have thought what he thought. He thought it anyway. It sounds like dying. Men took their places like water finding grooves it had found 1,000 times. Torches were moved and spear points shone along the parapet in a line like a constellation. The thing that came out of the wood was not the sea walker he had watched. It was a man walking as a man walks who has decided he will die where he is going. He came into the yard with his hands open and his hair full of ice, and his mouth moving without sound. When the sound came, it was not words, not at first. Then it was one. "King," he said. And then, "Snow." He stopped. He did not fall. He stayed upright because the men around him had stopped him without meaning to. He was one of the 10 Jon had sent south. Jon did not know his name until he took his chin in his hands and felt the scrape of cold burn on his skin, and told him, "Speak," and the man said, "Hareg," because his mind had gone to the safest thing it had, a name, and then he said, "Lake," and then he said, "Trees," and then he said, "Snow," again and again, because the world had become that. He wept, and then he shook, And then he laughed because men sometimes do all three. But he did not say Stannis, or Manderley, or Frey. It did not matter. The line of spearmen along the parapet were men of the watch. They had their mouths open and their eyes round like boys seeing their first sword. Some looked south. Melisandre came to Jon as the man was being led away with a cup in both his hands and his wrists tied to it, to make them stop shaking. "There will be a breaking," she said, as if they were discussing the way a frozen river sends out its first report. "Soon. Not today." "Good," Jon said. "I have work today." She laughed under her breath. "You are a mule," she said. "The gods have chosen a mule for their cart." "Then their cart will not tip," he said, and she left him to the next thing and the next after, which was Alice Karstark's letter back from the road with news of Karhold and plans to make children. The world made a face at him, and he made a face back. At twilight he went to Ghost and put his forehead against the direwolf's forehead, and closed both of their eyes. The direwolf huffed warm and old air in his face, and kept very still. The yard made its little noises around them like birds in hedges. A man coughed. A boy laughed, and another threatened to cuff him for it. Somewhere a kettle went to boil. He opened his eyes and told himself not to think of knives in the dark, and found that he had already thought it. He smiled despite himself. He went to his rooms to write a letter to White Harbor telling them something only a fool would say in a letter, and only a friend would hear right. He did not get there. They came at him not with a rush, but with that slow, terrible courage men sometimes find when they know they are wrong, and do not know what to do with it. They came out of the night like the next piece of darkness. He knew their faces before he knew their knives. He knew Bowen Marsh's sorrow and Othel's embarrassment, and the shorter faces behind them that belonged to men who had slept in his halls and eaten his soups and counted candles for him. He opened his mouth to say, "No," because that small word had done him so much good and might do once more. But the first knife went in, and his breath went out like a candle told its night had come. He did not fall. The second knife made sure he would. He heard a voice say, "For the watch," and another say, "Forgive me," and another say nothing at all. He saw there was no time for anger. It would be like lighting a fire in a blizzard and blowing on it, and blowing until your lips cracked, and your breath failed, and the fire went anyway. There was only room for one thought. It came without asking. "The letter is a bridge." He tried to say it, and it was too long to get out. The snow took him. There was a sound like a long line snapping. Ghost was there, white and then red, and then white again, and voices sounded as if they were coming up through the earth from a room where men met to plan something foolish. He wanted to tell Ghost to be still because the noise made the knives errand boys again, but he could not be still himself, and men seldom ask for what they cannot give. He fell into a place where there were no knives, only cold. He had always known this place must exist. He had touched the edge of it 1,000 times with his fingers on the wall. It was not the worst place. It had no slints in it, no queen's men, no letters. It had no ghost either. That was wrong. He wanted the wolf. He had the wolf. It was not sight, as he had known sight, nor scent, nor anything but everything. It was knowing where the rabbit would turn because the rabbit could not turn. It was the taste of iron strong in the mouth, and the feel of thrumming life struggling, and then going slack. It was snow under pads that did not mind it, and branches at a height his old body had never known. It was scent, layered on the old binding smells of men, and their fear, and fat, and meat, and leather. It was home in a way he had never had permission to call home. There were men bellowing. There was a woman laughing once, and then not. There was blood in the hot steam of it, and the way cold eats it up and keeps the smell as a trophy. He ran. He was there already. He was running, and there already. He saw his body on the ground, and did not see it because eyes were for other things now. He smelled himself. He smelled the knives. He smelled sorrow like piss under a bed. He smelled forgiveness like ashes rained on water. He smelled Melisandre's smile as a hot peppery thing at the edge of the map. He wanted to go north. The part of him that had always wanted to go north wanted it more now. He turned his head, and the world swung like a bell, and the sound it made was a call. He heard the wall answer it with a deep old tone. No words. A word older than words. He ran the wall walk at a long bound, and men scattered because men will scatter when a white thing comes for them in the snow without a sound. He did not care. He cared about the smell that had danced down from the cliffs, and the taste of fish in the air, and the way the dark lifted its fingers to show him a thing it had hidden. The night went with him. The camp went with him. The watch went on with its making of small laws in small rooms. The letter lay on the table with the cup on it, and the knife and the hand, and none of those moved. The girl who was not Arya slept with her mouth open, because women do that when they have cried too much. And Val sat with her back against the door and her knife in her lap, and did not sleep because she had taught herself not to. Maester Aemon dreamed without sight in a room where the fire had gone to a red seam, and smiled as if he had just remembered a name he had been trying to remember all afternoon. Melisandre stood in the yard with her hands held out, as if she expected something to fall into them, and for once her stones were black and did not burn. He ran. He let the snow choose the path where men had already trod, and he set his paws in those prints, and found they fit because men only ever make the one kind of mark. He reached the palisade, and went over it with the old wild joy that had not had a place in him in years, and he shook himself at the bottom, and made the snow leap from his fur, and catch the torchlight, and for a moment the world was a room lined with little stars. Men shouted because men will. He ran on. He went where the night told him, and where his own blood told him. He did not think as men think. He did not plan as men plan. He went. He found. He took. He made sure there was yet something left to take tomorrow. He did the wolf's work the way the man had done the wall's work. It was the same work. It was standing. It was saying no. It was killing when the law said kill, and standing over the thing he had killed until the law stopped crying. Back at the wall, men bound wounds and bandaged their shame. Bowen Marsh sat with his face in his hands, and the sound he made was an old man's sound. Othel Yarwick hammered a wooden peg into a place that had needed a wooden peg for 6 days, and had not received it because men had been busy. Dolorous Ed wrote in a ledger, and each word looked like a man going to his hanging with his hat on. Shireen dreamed of castles that were kind. Patchface sang to himself about bells under the sea. The Queen's men prayed at their baubles. And look, the wall breathed. Dawn came like a hand slowly opening. Men looked at one another, the way men do when something has happened, that none of them want to say aloud yet. Melisandre stood and looked at the sky, and her mouth made a little shape that might have been gratitude, and might have been grief. The ice cell doors held. The gate hinges creaked. Ghost came back with blood on his jaws and snow crusted along his legs up to the knee, and he went straight to a room where a body lay and pushed at it with his nose and whined. The body did not move. The blood did not. The men around it did. Melisandre did. She went to her knees so swiftly it looked like falling, and her hands went out and hovered over the cold chest, and she bowed her head. "Lord of Light," she said, as if greeting a guest she had grown tired of, "do not take him yet. I have waited in the dark beside fires I did not light, and used words I did not learn from your priests, and paid with coins I could not count. Do not take him yet." Men watched her, and some spat on the ground, and some crossed themselves, and some did nothing because all those things seemed equally foolish. Ghost lay down with his nose against the cold hand, and lifted it with his muzzle, and set it down, and lifted it again. He whined the way wolves do when they want the world to be a kinder place, and have not accepted yet that it will not. The fire in Melisandre's stones did not come. The air went out. Men stood and stood and stood, because sometimes standing is what men can do when there is no other thing. Under the skin of the snow, in the place where breath went without sound, there was the shape of a boy who had walked a narrow bridge, and a man who had stood in a yard and said no, and a wolf who had run the long dark and come back. And all three were the same shape, and all three were different. The shape turned. It was like a man trying to find the right place for his shoulder under a heavy sack. Then, somewhere no one could have pointed to, a small thing happened that could not happen until all the men watching had decided it would not. The breath went in. It was not much. It was enough to make Ghost lift his head, and the men around the bed freeze, and Melisandre laugh once. a bare bright sound like a knife touching iron. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you have put your hand on him. Do not take it off." No one moved. The breath went out. The breath came in. The breath went out and came in again, and in that small action was all the world. The knives in the dark had made their argument. The wall made its. Men waited to see which would triumph. The wolf waited because wolves are wise enough to wait for what their nose tells them is already underway. John was very cold. He had always been cold in some part of him. There was less of him and more of the cold for a time, and then more of him and less of the cold. He frowned, and a man nearby made a noise that was half sob and half laugh. He opened his eyes. The roof beams looked the same. The world smelled of smoke and wet wool, and the iron smell that comes after iron has been used on men. Melisandre's face was there, and it had a look on it he had not seen before. Relief, and under it, fear. Ghost's muzzle was there too, closer, warm, his nose raw, and his eyes wet. John moved his hand because it should move toward that warmth, and because men are not so clever that they will ignore a thing they have wanted as much as this. "Snow," someone said, and another voice said, "Lord Commander." And a third said, not caring who heard him know what he was, "John." He moved his mouth. It took longer than he liked. "I am here," he meant to say, and the sound was not that. It was a word no human ear could hear. It made Ghost's ears flick, and his eyes closed like a man tasting something sweet. He slept, and this time, the sleep was like a hand pushed between him and the cold, and it had fingers enough to make a difference. When he woke again, the wall was where it had always been. The letter was on the table with the cup and the knife, and someone had moved the cup, because its ring on the wood had a new wet crescent beside the old dry one. The day was the same, and not. The wolf lay with his head on Joan's foot, as if to say, "I knew you would remember this body." He ate. He drank. He spoke little because men's words had become a wall he could not fudge through. He listened. He heard the same things he had always heard: nails, ropes, grain, men. He heard one new thing: the sound men make when they find out the thing they set their knives against was not killed by them. It is a small sound. It carries. He could not afford to spend the day on his own miracle. The letter on the table was still a knife. The lake would still freeze a man up to his belly if he put his trust in it, and tried to catch a fish with his hands. The queen would still wish him gone. The red woman would still wish him other. The boy in the cell would still not know how to say his sins, so that they did not make him small. The girl who was not Arya would still need to be kept from being used as if she were a knot in a rope. The wolves in the woods would still need to find their own meat. The wall would still creak. He set his feet on the floor. "Slow," Maester Aemon said, and his old blind hands found Joan's. "Slow, John. Slow, and then quick." "I do not know how to be slow," John said, and Aemon smiled because he had known that once, and had had it pounded out of him by Winter and brothers-in-law. "You will learn," Aemon said. "You have had a good teacher." "Who?" John asked, honest in his ignorance. "The wall," Aemon said. He rose. He went to the window and looked out, and the world was as it had been, white and old and full of men somehow. He went to the table and picked up the pink ribbon and pulled it from the paper and set it aside and picked up the paper and tore it once and then twice, and then he stopped, because he had learned to let some things stand so he could tell what they were later. He sat. He took a quill in his hand. He warmed the tip. He set it into the ink that had frozen and thawed and frozen again. He watched the drops swell as if the quill were sucking in breath. He wrote. He wrote to Stannis, and to White Harbor, and to Denise Mallister, and to Cotter Pike, and to the crofter, and to the woman with the goats, and to the poacher, with his good manners, and to the boys, with wolves' eyes. He wrote to the queen's men without writing them at all by sending men to stand under the arch with spears, and to stack wet wood where fires like to catch, and to keep the law awake under the wall. He wrote to the dead in the only language he knew, by lifting a spear, and setting it down again in the place the dead will come and finding he could still hold it, that his hands did not fail him. He wrote a letter to himself by standing and not falling. He ended the last of the letters, as he had ended the first, with the business of the watch. We will judge our own. We will stand our watch. Send bread if you have it. Send men if you can spare them. Keep your fires to your own yards. Keep your knives for your own plates. Keep your eyes open. Winter is long. We will be here. He set his seal, a black smear with the ghost of a crow's foot in it. He blew on the wax and watched it go dull. He reached for the next sheet. The quill dripped. Ghost thumped his tail once against the floor. Outside, a man laughed at something that was not funny, because laughter is a thing that men will try when everything else is too heavy. The wall creaked. The day waited to see what he would make of it, and he took it up like a sword.